Good evening. We're going to call the meeting to order. Welcome to the West Hartford Public Schools Board of Education regular meeting on this Tuesday, December the 7th, 2001. May we begin with the roll call. Charlotte?
Dr. Chang,
Present.
Mr. Goldman,
I don't know if I did it right. Here. Here.
Dr. Harris,
Here.
Ms. Poland,
Here.
Ms. Nassarella,
Present.
Dr. Steinberg,
Here.
Dr. Thomas Farquharson,
Here.
Student Representative Avery Woods Weber,
Present.
Student Representative Andrew Maglio.
Present.
Thank you. And Andrew, may you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. As we continue, I would like to make a motion to modify the agenda to include a proclamation from our mayor and delegation and add it as the first agenda item under new business. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Any discussion? Or are we ready for the question? All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. Thank you. As we continue on, we've made note of a revision to the agenda order, so we will proceed with public communication, which will be followed by unfinished business, new business, and the first item on the new business agenda will be the announcement or the proclamation. Let us go on to public communications. I have a list of names here. I will call them in the order they are listed. Starting with, and before I do that, just want to announce apologies for the screen that is down at this time. It's being rather temperamental, so this will give us a time to practice our patience and flexibility. The first name listed here is Russell Gordon, or Gordman, I believe. And just to share for each individual who is coming up, each person has 3 minutes per individual, 21 minutes per subject matter. And when you come to the podium, please be mindful of Charlotte over here who will hold the car up. A yellow card means you have 1 minute left, and the red card means your time has ended. And prior to speaking, if you may please share your name and your address. Thank you, yes. We also, if there's a button up there, if you can please hit the button to have the mic turn on for you.
The light's on. Yeah, it goes red.
There you go.
My name is Russell Gardner. I live at 8 Willow Lane in West Hartford. I'd like to start by welcoming new members. I'm hoping that your leadership will help change the direction of meetings that as I've seen them in the last few months. I'm hoping that your leadership will help address mental health concerns that have been brought here, child abuse policies by the board, mask wearing risks to the children in our schools, issues that the parents have brought regarding the emotional development, the physical health of children, suicides. And this is basically, I'm just looking for a welcoming of diversity of viewpoints that parents are bringing here and are being ignored. It's basically, I mean, classic leadership shows that a group is stronger and healthier when embracing the diversity of perspectives in the group. Now, in the past few months, I've seen the opposite. I've seen the board in the last few months brush people off. You don't respond to the parents' concerns. You don't meet with the parents. I'm talking about public response to the parents' concerns. The board is incredibly biased, self-centered. You refuse to discuss mask efficacy. You seem to be afraid of the truth You refuse to discuss health risks to the children who are wearing masks. You refuse to address the surge in demand for behavioral health care. You can read all about it. There's a sense of smug disdain that comes from the board. You pursue your personal political agenda while putting our children at risk. There are no committees that have been formed to empower the parents for providing their input. I haven't even seen a survey to collect information from the parents. No compassion, no empathy, no kindness. Lots of lip service, lots of rhetoric. Good job. The board in the last few months has had its knee on the neck of these parents. To add insult to injury, the board has not responded publicly to any of the concerns parents have brought to the board. You're pushing down, you're imposing your own agenda. It's really a form of violence. If I had more time, I could explain it to you. And I just expect better. That's my phone saying time's up. Thank you.
Thank you. We next have Keith, Kusik. I don't want to offend by mispronouncing your last name.
You should hear how telemarketers absolutely flip when they answer the phone. So I don't know, when does my time start? Is it when I say my name and my address?
Yes.
Okay. So my name's Keith Kaczynskis from West Hartford, 6 Pioneer Drive. So, hi, I'm a parent of girls ages 6 and 8 in the district. The topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion in school is a controversial subject, but all for the greater good of promoting a diverse and thriving community. We are obviously lacking in this area, being dominantly white and little other cultural influences. This can indeed prove detrimental to how our children learn and absolutely needs to be addressed, but in a manner that is not divisive, inclusive of the parents, and continues to support our fundamental common beliefs. One of those beliefs is that all of us as Americans are created equal. No matter where you come from, you are no better than your neighbor. It takes a community to recognize unfair conditions and lend a hand. Most of us agree with this, but some do not. Those people can be Republican or Democrat, black or white, straight or gay, immigrants or natural-born citizens. Those who disagree with the American way may wear many different disguises. It is important, though, to recognize that this core belief exists as a majority in each and every one of those groups. We can also all appreciate that being different is hard and presents additional challenges to overcome. It is everyone's right and our duty to ensure others have an equal opportunity to be successful and happy. In promoting these ideals, though, I do not support divisiveness. In one of the books in the curriculum, there is a portrayal of a lone black girl standing up against a sea of faceless police officers behind riot gear helmets. It clearly dehumanizes the officers and suggests they are all against her right to breathe and be free. We cannot move forward as a community if we blame any one particular group for the issues we face. Instead, our children should be taught how to recognize when our ideals are threatened, no matter the uniform they wear or the signs they hold up. It is also important for us to provide our children accurate and age-appropriate information as they grow up. Gender identity is especially confusion, with natural changes in hormones that swing wildly. Giving incorrect guidance one way or the other can be devastating to their long-term health and well-being. In some of the literature I read, there are several examples that reinforce gender stereotypes, such as a favorite color being pink means feeling like a girl, or being a boy means pretending to be a firefighter or a police officer. It's not appropriate to label the activities, likes or dislikes to any gender. Instead, I want my young girls to know that they can like whatever they like and participate in whatever activity they want, regardless of gender. There are many books that promote the right ideals in the curriculum, but there are some that promote divisiveness, stereotypes, and judgment. Albeit likely inadvertently laced within the text, it's dangerous nonetheless. Teaching our children concepts that promote diversity is indeed a non-negotiable. How we do it, though, needs to be a conversation that includes the parents. A potential way to do this is by simply including a diversity of parental opinions in curriculum development. I ask you to take a tactical pause and allow us, the parents, to be part of this journey with you and work together to provide the best education possible. That's a red card. See, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, we have Kate Capes.
Good evening. For months now, parents have come before the board to tell you that they object to what is being presented to their children through the SEL curriculum. I have similar concerns regarding the topics and teacher presentations during community lessons at the high school level. Parents have explained that their objections are focused on protecting their children and preserving their innocence. So when the alarm bells signaling a loss of innocence or the hypersexualization of our children begin to ring, we parents will fight. God has entrusted our children to us. Pioneers in education such as Piaget, Froebel, and Montessori showed us that child development happens in stages and that specific developmental needs must be satisfied during a particular window of opportunity to be wholly ready to venture into the next stage. Children seek the answers to questions that nourish their developmental needs. From 0 to 6, that question is, what is that? Everything the child does orients him toward understanding the truth about the world surrounding him. A child at this stage of development is not asking, who am I or who are you? He must master his own body and understand and explore the world around him before he is ready to ask such questions. The SEL curriculum, in subtle and not so subtle ways, forces upon the children these two questions, who am I and who are you? And heavily incorporates, how do I feel? SEL promotes feelings and encourages decisions based on feelings. From 6 to 12, the questions driving a child's endeavors is, why is it? Essential to this stage is the ability for children to work in pairs or small groups. Shared productive work is essential to seeking the answers to this question. This is why we have seen such a negative impact in the children during the pandemic. They have been physically separated from their peers. These unmet developmental needs are going to leave a huge hole. Adolescents from 12 to 18 years begin to ask, who am I? The teen who is moving from childhood toward adulthood learns to overcome challenges through his own efforts. Effort is a missed focus in the SEL curriculum. Through community lessons, the disturbing answers that my children and other teens are getting to this essential question of who am I are, I am my gender and sexual preferences. I am privileged and should feel shame. I am a victim. These answers defy our common inherent human dignity. Inherent dignity does not come from the affirmations of others. Awareness of others' feelings does not lead a child to choosing the socially or morally right thing to do. SEL teaches that based on the others' feelings, children should abandon truths instilled in them by their family and faith. This is dangerous, and it encourages children to use a progressive culture as a moral compass rather than to be grounded in the truth that is greater than their own feelings.
Thank you. Next, we have Patty Fleming.
Hi, my name is Patty Fleming. I'm at 34 Linwald, West Hartford. My name is Patty Fleming. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My family and I moved to West Hartford about 2.5 years ago. One of the deciding factors for choosing West Hartford was for its highly ranked school system. We absolutely love living here and enjoy so many facets of our great West Hartford community. At the last school board meeting, I sat in the audience and listened as you expressed how child-centric and student-focused your policy-making strives to be. I can tell you for certain that after 2 years in West Hartford Public Schools, you did not have my 3 children in mind. You didn't have them in mind when you unanimously passed policy regarding critical race theory and gender inclusion ideology. I can also say critically that you didn't have my children in mind when you forced them all home for a year and a half and continue to implement anti-scientific mask mandates and encourage the unnecessary and ineffective vaccination for all school-aged children. The CDC recently came out with a report saying that the vaccinated and unvaccinated transmit COVID-19 at the same exact rates. There are plenty of studies that have come out that call into question the efficacy of mask wearing and social distancing protocols. I would venture to say that these policies not only didn't have my children in mind, but an expansive number of children whose parents are starting to wake up to the anti-science rhetoric and mandates you are continuing to push on our children. Mr. Moore, as an American history teacher, you can appreciate the fact that the founders of this country strive to create a system of government that would prevent an impassioned minority or majority to impact laws and create policy. And yet that is exactly what you are allowing to happen here in this body. I would venture to say that many people are in our community, if given the safe space to say so, if they weren't afraid of being canceled or losing their jobs or being labeled hateful, believe there are only two genders and that there's nothing fluid about it. Most would believe that all people as image bearers of God ought to be treated not by how dark or light their skin is, but by their character. And most people believe in our right to choose what is best for our families and our medical decisions and what subjects our children should be exposed to. At the last meeting, many of you lauded one of your board members' ability to remember the names of the children under the care of this elected body. Mr. Moore and fellow members of this board, I just made your job easier. You don't have to remember the names of mine. They are no longer under your care. We have lost trust in your policy-making decisions. I came here tonight to give voice to my own concerns, but also to encourage and embolden the growing number of parents I'm meeting who are expressing these same values. Contrary to what you say, Mr. Moore, we are not part of a well-funded political advocacy group. We are not political operatives. If anyone is using our children as political pawns in a divisive social game, a strong argument could be made that you are. New members of the board, please listen. Listen to the voices of concerned parents that are out there. I am part of a growing grassroots parent group. Our voices matter too. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Jacob Werblow.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Jacob Werblow from 27 Howland Road. Just first want to recognize the other speakers. Just powerful testimony, and it's just wonderful to have that opportunity to speak. So I appreciate you for coming out. So I just want to share a little bit of observations from the middle school transition. Consider fifth grade. 11-year-old child, one core teacher who is responsible for 24 students a day. Now, in a few months, now that child has daily recess, play, playground access, and is with that self-contained class for 4 to 5 hours of the day. And in just a few months, when they transition to middle school, that same child has all new teachers every 42 minutes, all new students in each of the classes, and the teachers then have caseloads of 110, 120 students per day. So that's a huge transition, and I don't think that that's in the best interest of child development and of our children's needs. So there is a solution, and I think it's really simple. COVID did give us an opportunity when last year we moved to a block schedule. And even though some teachers really struggled with the 80-minute block, because it's very difficult to teach direct instruction math 80 minutes to anyone, especially middle school students. But that gave the other teachers, science, arts, language arts, history, opportunity to go much deeper into the curriculum and to build better relationships with the students and for the students to build relationships with each other. So even though that rationale was made because of the safety concerns with COVID and the motivation to decrease the number of interactions during the day, I think it's something that deserves reconsideration, because now we're in a situation where the children have returned, but they have fractured relationships. They're difficulties, figuring out their own identity. We have this new curriculum that's needed, but is controversial, and the children are not able to develop relationships because they're in a model that does not make the most sense for their own learning. So, as an educator myself, an educator who trains teachers, several of my students teach at Sedgwick. They're alumni from CCSU, and I really hope that we could together possibly have more of a structured conversation to look at time and how we can utilize that differently. So thank you all for listening. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for your service. Being on the board is a full-time evening commitment, so thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other guests here who would like to make a comment? Please approach the podium.
Good evening. My name is Jeannie Wegen. I live at 6 Middlebrook Road in West Hartford. Tonight, I wanted to voice my concerns regarding Superintendent Moore's response to a recent news article. The article was brought about after parents spoke here before the Board of Education on November 3rd, voicing their concerns. When the article was published, the superintendent had an opportunity to address the concerns of the parents who had spoken. But instead, he deflected and politicized them. The parents' concerns were once again ignored, and an opportunity for transparency was lost. I'm worried situations such as these foster a climate in which parents, many of which are taxpayers, will be afraid to speak up. Tonight, I would like to formally ask the Board of Education and Superintendent Moore to coordinate a public forum meeting where parents' concerns and questions can be addressed in a public setting. It's an opportunity that we do not have at this meeting, or these meetings. This will allow parents to better understand curriculum and policy they have questions and concerns about. It will make parents feel as though they have a voice in their child's education. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, we will continue on to unfinished business, which there is none. Moving on to new business. And this is where I just saw them here, and I don't know if our delegation is here. I believe they may have stepped out for a proclamation. Someone could just get their attention, please. Thank you all for your patience. And what we will do is we will continue on with the program. Again, what was intended was a proclamation honoring the recognition of our superintendent as Superintendent of the Year. And we certainly know that is recognition that can be given at any point in time. So with that, we will continue on to new legislative matters, updates rather, that is. And we will have Dr. Morrow to please come, and Superintendent Moore to give us an update on what this is about, please.
Okay, thanks. As Dr. Morrow and Jason Siegel, our athletic director, Dan Zatoon, principal of Hall, and Julio Duarte, principal of Conard, come up. In the 7 years ago, the board addressed the question, after a lot of people brought it up, about chieftains and warriors, created policy around those two names. And over time, certainly and they'll go through what the board came to the conclusion. New legislation passed this past year makes every board have to bring this topic up again. and discuss this and make a decision going forward. So with that, Dr. Morrow.
Thank you, Tom. As Tom mentioned, and as you have in your briefing book, the Public Act 21-2 included the provision that beginning in the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023, no municipality shall be paid a grant if they have or have a school that uses symbols or images that depict or refer to a federally recognized Native American tribe or individual, custom, tradition, mascot, nickname, logo, etc. And so really, for us, this is incumbent upon us to review then our status with the Chieftain and with the Warrior, because the town grant to be received is a little more than $27,000 on a yearly basis. So in the fall of 2014, following student initiative, community discussion emerged about nicknames and references and whether they were appropriate for a school. We then encouraged students with the board, encouraged students in the community to engage in a dialogue about this. We spent time in public settings about this. We did extensive work at the high schools as far as surveys and work with the students. The board policy subcommittee spent hours looking at recommendations, inputs, speaking with both local and national bodies, and reviewing policies, and came up with 3 options, really, that were then proposed to the board in 2015. One was really to keep the Chieftain and Warrior name, retire everything else, including the logos and the student organizations with the Native American references. One was to change both, retire everything, the Warrior names and everything else as far as mascots and logos. And the third was really to do nothing at that point. And so the board, after careful decision and debate, unanimously passed the policy that kept and maintained the Chieftain and Warrior names, but required the schools to change the mascots and the imagery around that. And so at that point, the both high schools engaged in a process, working with public, working with their students, and developed the new logos for Conard and for Hall. And so what we're left now with the idea that in light of the work that you've done as a board with your equity policy, in light of the legislation, we need to be considering whether or not it's time to engage in the discussion and engage in the determination from your standpoint of, do you at this point change and ask the schools to go back with the students and to change the Chieftain and the Warrior names?
And just to chime in, and thanks, Andy. Both, I'd say Jason, Julio, and Dan, very rare that would you have principals and athletic directors that have lasted this long to have been able to revisit this.
Yep.
And all of them have done a really good job in decoupling the name with the imagery of the past. That being said, it's still the imagery of the past. It's still the links of the past. And this is one of those topics that is unique to the board. There isn't a administrative take. I've always said from the beginning of this, you need to ask us information from costs and otherwise. So this is one of those topics that that the board does vote on, uniquely kind of up to you as policy. So happy to answer any questions if you have nothing else to add, Andy.
No, just as you can see from your briefing as well, I should have mentioned that Hall and Conard are currently a part of approximately a dozen schools in the state that still maintain a name that would be considered linked to a Native American mascot or tradition.
Thank you. Colleagues, questions? Yes, Andrew.
Yeah, I have a question. So, from what you just said, Mr. Moore, and from what I've heard about in the past, I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure the word chieftain also is applied to other cultures outside of the United States and Native American tribes. So, I guess I'm wondering, I wasn't obviously that engaged in 7 years ago when the mascot the mascot imagery was taken away. But at that point, were all ties kind of severed between the name and the image, or is there something besides like the legacy that still concretely ties the two together?
It's a good question, Andrew, and I think it's difficult to sever something from a legacy. I think we can, and to be completely candid, and my children went to Conard, and so I'm very much a part of that community as well. I think we can, in essence, kid ourselves and say that, well, Chieftain can refer to other things as well, just as we can say that Warrior can refer to other things as well. We're kind of kidding ourselves, and we're parsing language at that point, and we're doing a disservice to an entire community, I think, when we do that.
I think that your question's fair, and it's something that a word in and of itself that's cross-cultural has different meanings. The roots of both of those words at both of the schools, in both of the imagery, in both of the history, when it was a mascot, when there were people dressed up at both Hall and Conard going back 30, 40 years, there's certainly that tie. You know as well as I do, the student groups at Hall used to be the reservation. That's moved away. Student group doesn't call itself that anymore. At Conard, it's the Red Sea. Moved away from that, but there is a TF often on the shirts, correct, that the students use? And what does that signify?
Yeah.
Tribe forever.
Yeah.
So even though we've tried, there's still that connection that no matter what, that still exists in the memory and in the day-to-day operations.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, that's interesting. I was just curious. But, I mean, yeah, it's a very good point that, yeah, legacy is important.
Other questions? Ethan?
Yeah, this is sort of new to me. Question, so when I read the briefing book this afternoon, my first thought was warriors, and I don't associate that with Indian tribes, more with the military. And so I went to the dictionary. It does not mention Native American at all. Did the same with chieftain, which, and maybe I'm looking for the edge, but, I mean, because you guys did change, my first thought was, reading Robert Louis Stevenson as a kid, was the chieftains of the Scottish clans. So my question is this past history where you're, because of the way it was associated, you're still there? Because if you've changed it, to me, it all depends on how you look at it. And certainly warriors to me, and I'm focused on that more than chieftains, because chieftains to me is sort of ambiguous. Unless you want to think of it that way, it doesn't really strike me. I saw it as different, so
Okay.
I guess that's.
Well, and that's fair. I think what we're simply putting forward here, and it's for the board to decide, is the state sees it that way, and certainly groups historically have seen it in that way.
This did not mention Native American in either aspect.
No, the state was clear in the bill.
The state was clear in the bill, though,
legislation.
in the legislation.
That these are actually, they've defined what the words are?
Well, they specifically defined chieftain
Yeah.
as these are the names you will pay, you will lose all funding if chieftain is one of those words.
So is it, I apologize, is it?
No, it's fine.
Is it the state that's deciding this, or is it, because this read that it was the Native American tribes?
No, it's the state. This is part of state legislation passed this year. Now, the Native American tribes in the state have been unanimous in their
Correct.
statements over the past few years that they would like the schools to remove their names and the team names that have ties.
Yeah.
Warriors wasn't listed. That's the question. You could get into the semantics of is chieftains and is warriors. So I guess you can look at what's the roots of the names in the district. And again, we're not trying to advocate for a position. We just want to be historically accurate that, yes, 10 years ago, both of the schools had Native American imagery and both represented warriors and chieftains. I think I actually agree with your point completely about chieftains can mean a lot of things. I'm Irish. I used to listen to the chieftains on Saturday mornings with my dad.
That was also there.
Yeah, and so I understand that difference. This is what the state legislation brings forward. And in addition, I think the board has received over the past few years many communications about this topic.
Gail, and then Deb.
Superintendent Moore, you said that the state we would lose all of our funding. Can you I think that's what you said.
And they get $27,820.
From the Pequot and Mohegan grant. I mean, the decision isn't reliant on the funding. It's
Right, because what percent of our funding?
Oh, it's minuscule.
Minuscule.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. I
Yeah.
also wanted to say, as somebody who grew up in this town and went to Hall High School, that those names have meaning to people who grew up here and who participated in the sports teams. And I think that that also has to be taken into account when we're making this decision and thinking about it, that some people here have, lived with those and played for those names, and it has a meaning on that side of the issue as well.
Thank you. Avery, and then Deb.
Like Andrew, I was in 5th grade, but I just want to better understand the history behind this. You mentioned communications to the board. Were those from groups within West Hartford, within our surrounding Hartford community? And could you just elaborate on those communications?
Sure. There was one person who's since moved away. We've tried to get in touch with him that acted as liaison with many groups who worked with lacrosse, who had a lot of discussions about the lacrosse roots of Native American names, and we did get communication. I think you have one of them.
Yeah,
there
and I
at that point.
can share with the board as well. This was actually shared going back through the file back in 2015. This was shared with the board and with Dr. Overmyer Velasquez, who was the previous board chair and was the board chair at that time from the National Congress of American Indians. This is a letter that was conveyed through Andrew Lee, who was the representative we were working with locally, who was also tied into, as Tom had mentioned, with the Mohawk tribe and the work up in New York. And this is from the executive director at the time. And they talk, while I and many others recognize that the vast majority of individuals who support the continued use of Indian references, names, and imagery do so with good intentions, I want to assure you that I and countless other tribal leaders are not honored when schools perpetuate Indian-inspired names and mascots such as the Hall Warriors or the Connor Chieftains. Extensive research provides demonstrable evidence that the intolerance and harm promoted by Indian-inspired names and mascots can have very real and disturbing consequences, from negatively impacting the self-esteem of Native youth to perpetuating harmful stereotypes and racial tension. As your town has experienced firsthand, applying seemingly benign names like chieftains and warriors to student populations enables an atmosphere where American Indians are not honored, but in fact stereotyped, mocked, or worse. And so again, this was, and I can share this copy with the board if you'd like later as well.
Thank you. Deb.
Good evening. Thank you for this presentation. I was trying to pull up the legislation because I've read it many, many, many times, and I actually don't remember that it lists out the names specifically. It was pretty vague, and I think that there were some members of our media in Connecticut who were trying to make lists of potential names that might run afoul of this legislation, though there hasn't actually been a list published yet by the State Office of Policy and Management, who I think, although it's not 100% clear, would actually be the state agency in charge of making the decision. But I did want to also bring up and ask for you to share with the public as well. There's another part of this section of Public Act 21-2 June special session, and that is that if the district gets a letter or permission from a local tribe saying this name is okay, this name doesn't offend us, then the district can choose to keep that name. And so I'm just wondering if we can have an update on where we are, because I know that we are seeking information from our local tribes to touch on that piece of the legislation.
Thanks. Yeah, we've communicated. We've written email and letter and haven't heard back yet. So it's been about 6 weeks since we wrote and haven't gotten communication.
Okay, thank you.
Jason?
Yeah, just on that point, my understanding of the exemption there is that that was available for schools that had existing relationships with the tribes, that or schools that were on reservation land. And I didn't think that there were other schools that had that possibility of submitting the letter.
That just isn't the way I read it, so let's try to get some clarification on that.
Other questions, comments? Jason?
Yeah, so one, thank you for the presentation and for bringing the candor to the conversation. Obviously, something that has continued to to surface as a problem even after the board's attention to this in 2015. So, I think there's a compelling case to change these names. One, we are an underfunded district, and our students deserve as much of the state funding as we can get. This share of funds will continue to grow as a part of the Pequot's and Mohegan's contributions to the state. Second, I think there's a very strong compliance issue here for our anti-racism and equity policy. Very clear from the letter, the 2015 letter, that if the names were associated with any other racial or ethnic group, that it would very likely have been raised and would not be okay. So why would it be okay for Native Americans, right? And just in regards to getting communication from the tribes have communicated with the state through the General Assembly virtually continuously over the last several years about their preferences on this. And so, including tribal leaders and Native American students in the state. So based on their testimony in state bodies, it seems very clear that these are their wishes. This has an additional, benefit of, aligning with our curriculum and with the district's stated commitments to building a broader conversation about hearing and honoring the voices of living indigenous tribes and nations. Doing so in this way, I think, also paves the way for developing a stronger curriculum in this fashion, and anticipates the rollout of new social studies standards for K through 8 grades in Native American studies in the coming years. So, yeah.
Thank you. Another question. Ethan?
I had one question, but I guess I'm not sure who it goes to since it's a board decision. If we were to get rid of the nicknames, what would happen if somebody, and this is just thinking it through, or at least as I thought it, came and said they wanted to get rid of King Philip School? What about, and this I realize sounds, or at least to me it didn't make sense, but you never know. PETA came and said, we want to get rid of animal. I mean, you can go a whole, I don't know, it's where does it stop, where does it end? I think you have detached it, at least as I read it, and I think, and again, it just, because to me, again, the military, the warrior thing, I think, I have a totally different response, and Chieftains, I did have a different response, and I realize historically in West Hartford it was associated, but you either turn the table or turn the page or you don't, so sorry.
Other questions or comments? Ari, yes, Dr. Steinberg.
I just wanted to kind of get back to, it's interesting because I was feeling the same way about warriors versus chieftains, and when I associate the word warrior with like cancer survivor, but sitting here in front of the board and actually sitting here and looking back at our policy that we just passed as a district. I am actually in favor of changing the names. I mean, if you look at our vision, the vision quoted by this board and voted on by this board is, we make a solemn promise to identify and dismantle all elements of systemic racism and historical inequities. We vow to clear paths with a relentless duty to those in traditionally marginalized groups. And I guess for me, my interpretation of the word warrior, while I might not see it as disrespectful, it's not really my decision to make. If there are people telling us that by using these terms shows some level of disrespect or inequity, then as a district, I feel that we have to honor a policy that we just voted to uphold. So I would say I actually support the idea of changing both names.
Other questions or comments? So we've had lots of questions and comments shared, and that's good. That's what this is for, to discuss. And recognizing the path from 2015 to where we are now, certainly a lot has happened. And yes, we do have a public act that is encouraging more of this discussion. Certainly we know the onus of our role in being on the board is how do we respond to that. However, we know that when it comes to decisions, that is not something we want to do in haste, and we certainly want to have that to be an inclusive process. And so with all that has been shared, any other thoughts of where we are? Again, the recommendation is that the Board of Education review the continued use of chieftain and warrior in light of recent changes to Connecticut legislation and BOE policy. So we've begun that review process. Jason.
I didn't mean to cut you off. No?
That's
Okay.
all right.
I'd like to raise a motion to bring the district into compliance with Public Act 21-2 with a vote to discontinue the use of chieftain and warrior and create a process to adopt new mascots.
So a question has been brought to the floor for us to bring the district into compliance for Public Act 21-2 with a vote to discontinue the use of chieftain and warriors and create a process to adopt new measures. Do we have a motion?
I'm not sure your process. Can I ask a question, or do I wait till after you have your motion?
Wait for a second. So we have the motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
Questions or discussion?
So the question is, sorry, the red throws me off. I thought I heard that Warriors was acceptable to the state.
I can only share, Ethan, the legislation that you have, which is any name, symbol, or image that depicts, referred to as associated with a state or federally recognized Native American tribe or a Native American individual, custom, or tradition as a mascot, nickname, logo, or team name.
Okay.
I would argue that
somebody said it was not on the list.
I believe it was Deb mentioned that there was a media piece afterwards interpreting that listed a number of the different schools and such, and but I don't know that the state has put out a list specifically. I think it's open to their interpretation with that, and as much as it's your decision to make, but I think it's clear that historically that both have been associated with Native American customs or traditions.
Deb.
Yes, a question to the mover of the motion. Is this a vote that you're hoping to take this evening, or is this a vote that we're hoping to take on a different evening?
A different evening.
Could you then amend your motion then to state that we're not voting on this motion tonight?
Right.
Thank you.
I amend my motion to vote at a future meeting.
Thank you. And may I suggest with that, thank you, with the initial amendment which we have to bring the district into compliance for Public Act 21-2 with a vote to discontinue the use of chieftain and warriors and create a process to adopt new measures, and for this vote to take place at a later time. And want to just propose for a later time, we, looking at our calendar, want to propose the January the 18th meeting date for that to be the time to vote. And and with that, certainly want that to be a process from now until then, to hear questions from from our students, certainly comments from our students, from the community, certainly to make use of our open comment section and via email as well, so that from then until now, we certainly have had a chance to hear from the community prior to making a vote. And we still are in the discussion session, so I'm going to just ask if we can, again, restate the motion, including the amendment and the proposed date.
So the motion is to bring the district into compliance for Public Act 21-2 with a vote to discontinue the use of chieftain and warrior and create a process to adopt new measures on January 18. January 18.
So with that amended motion, maybe have a second.
Second.
And now discussion.
So as a follow-up, I'm sorry to be so technical, but the way the motion is worded right now, I can't decide. I think it means that if we vote yes right now, then we're stating that we are going to be voting yes on January 18th. And I think, personally, I would feel more comfortable if the motion were just that we have a vote on January 18th on whether or not to change our names. They're not even mascots, really, but whether or not to change the names, as opposed to stating the motion in such a way that is biased towards a yes vote or a no vote on that date. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes. And so with that, may we have a restatement? Oh, a question.
I was going to make an amendment, so I'll wait.
So with the current question on the floor, if we could just restate the amendment to have it to be more reflective of an open process in terms of the voting, as has been shared.
Well, from my understanding, from my understanding, in order to bring the district into compliance, it would be about the removal of the name. Right, so if the motion is about compliance.
Deb?
I'm respectfully asking that we make the motion be phrased in a way that allows for more thought by board members, because frankly, if the motion is that I have to decide now how I'm going to vote in January, when we haven't had the opportunity to hear from the public, I can't support that motion. If we're going to vote now on how we're going to vote in January, we may as well vote now. I'd rather just vote on the process that we will be voting in January, yes or no. Does that make sense?
I hear it differently. I hear what you're saying. I hear it differently. What I hear is that the motion on the floor is that come January, at that time, we vote whether or not we vote to be in compliance with state regulations. And at that time, the vote would either be a yes or a no. And so there's no position at this time to make a choice. That choice would happen in January, either being in favor of being in compliance with what has been proposed, or the no answer would be not being in favor and keeping it as is, keeping the names as they are.
So I want to just reiterate what I said previously. We listened to 10 parents speak here tonight who feel that the board is not responsive to what they are experiencing and what they feel. This is a very big decision in this community. I think if I remember correctly, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, when this was last brought up, this was one of the biggest board meetings ever with parents coming in here. I think that we have to take into account what the community feels as well. And I personally do not feel by January 18th, with holidays and missing meetings and things like that, and the information that I personally would like to at least make available to myself, that I'm going to have the ability to make that type of decision. I don't see a rush to run to do this. This is a big decision. This affects people who live in this town for many, many years and have very strong feelings about it. And I feel that we should take the time and get the information, and I don't feel that January 18th is going to give us that time.
Thank you. Fair enough. And so Ethan, yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt you either. Two things. One is, and I'm not the wordsmith, more numbers, but when you say in compliance, that implies that we're out of compliance or we're in compliance. I thought I heard it was a optional type of thing. If you go with the policy, you get the 20,000. If you're out of the policy, you don't get the 20,000, but compliance means we're in violation of a state. So I just don't know what the words are. I just think if we could word it differently. I also think, and this may come out of left field, but if we are saying we are worried about how we define things, then we should look at King Phillips as well. Not that I think it should change, but if you're going to do one, you might as well at least engage the other, which opens a whole can of worms, but presumably would come later. So just, I don't know, but I certainly think if we can change the wording on the compliance, because to me it says, we obviously want to be in compliance, but this isn't like, it's a yes or no. It's a yes, no, or you lose the money. So I don't know if there's a way to word that.
Thank you. I wonder if the compliance is with specific respect to Public Act 21-2. And so according to that, that's where that piece becomes.
I'm just saying, can we use a different word? If we're following compliance is a yes or no to me. And what I heard was this is, if you want the 20,000 plus, you need to be following this request. Or law, or what statute.
Public Act, all right, yes. Other thoughts or questions, comments? And I know that we still have on the floor, in terms of the current motion, applies to January the 18th. However, there was a request for the time to be pushed back further. And so, team, what are your thoughts on that, to identify a different date on the calendar? Yes.
I'm in favor of moving the date out, especially with the holidays. It's a month and a half, and that doesn't seem like enough time.
Thank you, Claire. Pardon me for not referring to as Claire. Yes, Claire. All right. Tom.
Again, your decision about the timing. It's just if we're going to have a process to create a new name, to create new logos, then it is time sensitive. If you want it done by the end of this year, which is, so that's part of the question. If you move it out, and then you really can't do it at the same time we're doing budgets and budget hearings and everything else. So that takes out, that you're pushing what would look like into April or late April for this discussion if you go through the budget time frame.
Thank you. Claire.
What is the specific deadline? It says for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023. So does the decision have to be made by June 2022?
With that decision, and whatever the outcome may be, we know that there are many things that would have to follow based on what that decision is. And so many collaboration with our town, administration, logos, things that are printed, all of that. So wanting to allow time for those changes to take place, the more time available for that, the better. So yes, that date is there for the 23rd, but again, wanting to try to be planful in how things are implemented. And so with that, respecting that, we certainly do, as has been shared, we have our budget period that's coming up, and for our newcomers, you will experience that. It certainly is one that is quite involved. And so with that, with the current proposed date for the 18th, however, not wanting to go too far into the year, what team, I don't have the calendar in front of me of all of the upcoming meetings, the 21st.
February 1st.
February 1st, pardon. February the 1st. Looking at agenda items with that.
Look at it, I'm sorry. When we look at a different way, to Claire's point, how much time do you need if you are going to change? I think that might be a better way to time it than, so that gives the community time to look into it. I mean, do you need a year? Do you need 18 months? Or are we past that? Or, I mean, you're not talking about not doing it if you do it, it's just when.
So the districts, as we say, we've seen double digits districts in the past 3 years make this change. And they didn't have the same drawn out process that West Hartford underwent 7 years ago in terms of the question and what went into it. Boards made the decision, And then Newington, for example, became the Nor'easters. And so they got their schedules done for the following year. I think that was made, the change wasn't made, I think that was made last January, Jason. I'm not sure if you know off the top of your head. And then they began competing this fall as the Nor'easters. And some of the uniforms are still undergoing the shifts at the school as you rotate the uniform shifts going through. But basically, we would envision Julio and Dan of a committee to get together, have, if the choice of the board was to make a name change, if not, then there's no reason to do anything. If there was a vote to make a name change, you'd bring groups together for a group of things to be nominated over a set time, and then perhaps what most districts have done is narrowed it down to 5 names or so, and then have the vote on those 5 names, and then begin crafting the logo and the work that goes from that forward. So, no, it's a lot of work, no doubt, that Julio and Dan and Jason and Andy would be signing up for to get done in a period of time. It's a question of, do you want it done for the start of a school year, or do you want to delay it for a following school year? You don't want to do it mid-year. I think that's pretty clear. You want a clean start for a year.
So what I'm going to ask is, recognizing the February 1st meeting date, if we could amend the motion to identify the February the 1st meeting date, and if we can proceed to vote at that point in time, whether or not that is the date that we have the vote based on the motion. And thank you, Superintendent Moore, for describing what process could take place thereafter, February the 1st, in terms of the implementation process, and that would certainly involve things that have been discussed here and how that is rolled out. Before amending the motion, yes, Claire.
I'm just wondering, is it possible to get feedback from the students? And I'd like to know where the students stand. I also am curious, not being a sports player myself, not being a cheerleader, not being involved in that, how much of the student body identifies with Chieftain and Warriors and wouldn't be upset by a change? I mean, I'm just curious where the student body stands. And I understand the legacy and the people who've moved on, but the current student body, I'd really like to know how they feel.
It's a very good point, and we certainly do want to hear from the student body, and that's why the time from now until then is where we want to be able to hear that. Again, what we're deciding on now is whether or not to vote February 1st, and that vote at that time will determine which way to go, whether to keep the names as is or whether to change the names. So what you're speaking of, certainly so, and we want to be able to hear those voices leading up to the time that we vote on what to do. Avery.
If I may respond briefly to Ms. Nasrallah. As a student representative, I would prefer the February 1st date because it would enable me as a student, and I assume Andrew too, to speak with more students at our school possibly. It takes a good amount of time for information to get through student groups, to get to the thousands of people, well, there's thousands of students at our school of those who may have thoughts on this. But also in considering community feedback, it's important that on one point we get the information out to people as quickly as possible so that they can begin that mobilization of those conversations and dialogues outside of board meetings, but also that we don't delay this for the same reasons as previously discussed, because I wouldn't like to be hasty in stating student opinions since I haven't been able to bring this information we just started talking about to students. But there is some sentiment among students at Hall in regards to this name and how we want to present as a community. And I think that it would be appreciated by many members of our community if we did make that change.
Other questions or comments? Deb.
So I'd like to just make one final request, that when the motion is remade, it be made in a way that makes it abundantly clear that as we vote tonight as a board, we are voting on whether or not to vote to discontinue the use of chieftain and warrior, not any other phrasing that makes it seem like we're voting today for something that we're actually not voting on until February 1st. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Jason, yes.
Thank you.
Nope. There you go.
There it is. Okay. First of all, I want to thank everyone on the board for the feedback on this. I think it's very important that we proceed in a way that reflects indeed our policies around equity and about inclusion and hearing the diversity of opinions. The process we go through should reflect that. And so I think I have a sweet spot here. So the motion I'd like to change to is to address Public Act 21-2 with a vote on the use of chieftain and warrior and create a process to adopt new measures on February 1.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any question or discussion?
I'm sorry.
Deb?
What do you mean by and create a process? Because if the vote on February 1st is that we're retaining the names, then there wouldn't be a process.
It could be create a process if necessary.
That would be fine.
This is it, Jason.
All right, this
All
is
right.
a part of the process. Thank you so much.
Oh,
Oh, pardon.
Gail's got
Yes,
it.
Gail, yes.
Yeah, I'm getting confused. Could we restate what we're going to vote on?
We're trying.
So nope, that's all right, and this is what this is about. So the motion has been rescinded essentially, and it's going to be restated, and if there are any questions based on what motion has been put forth, then we'll certainly discuss that. But yes, it will be restated, yes.
Yeah, so to restate the motion, as it's been revised, is to address Public Act 21-2 with a vote on the use of chieftain and warrior and create a process, if necessary, to adopt new measures on February 1.
Is there a second?
Guys, measures or names?
Hold on.
Second.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
Sorry. Measures, I mean, you're talking names. Is there any reason not to say names? I just trying to clarify.
No, I was reflecting the language that the chair was using.
Okay.
It could be more than names, though, because it could be mascots. I think you're referring to the measures, because it would be the measures that would come after a decision that would involve not just necessarily the name, but also anything like mascot creation or that kind of thing.
I mean, I'll accept it, but to me, measure doesn't mean anything.
I understand.
So any other questions or comments with the motion that's on the floor that has been properly seconded? With that, we'll ask all of you to try your minds. All of those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
Any opposed?
Oppose.
One opposed. Any abstentions? One abstentions. All right, the ayes have it. So again, thank you. And with that, we know that on February the 1st, we'll come together and we will vote on this motion. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, moving on to continued with under new business, section B, modification to the 2021-2022 school calendar. Superintendent Moore.
Okay, thank you. This edition came with as you know, we passed the calendar 2 years ahead of time, and for the school year, and occasionally there are modifications that are required during the year because something comes up. This certainly isn't something that's required, but enough parents came forward and teachers, and I had a discussion with Teresa, the president of the WHEA, that the February 23rd is the Thursday before vacation. I'm sorry, February.
December.
That's my birthday. December 23rd is the Thursday before vacation. And that's a full day, which in many places, actually about half the places around us, and typically West Hartford, would have a short Wednesday schedule, a regular Wednesday schedule. Ours right now is in as a full day. So the question came forward of whether the board would want to consider making that a short day before the vacation so people could begin travel or anything else that might get involved a little earlier that afternoon. Again, up to you.
Thank you. Any questions at all? You know what, I will just go ahead and propose the motion, and we'll discuss if there are questions at that time. So the recommendation is that the Board of Education approve a modification to the 2021-2022 school calendar to make Thursday, December the 23rd, 2021, an early dismissal Wednesday release. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Ari. A second.
I second.
Claire, thank you. Questions or discussion?
Can I ask Tom a question? I assume since you're proposing it, you're fine with it or recommending it? I realize you're passing to the school board, but I figure ask the question.
No, that's fair, Ethan. I think that it is our teachers have done an awful lot this year, in the past year and a half. I don't think that all right, difficult part is I never argue against instructional time because I think it's so valuable. So it's it's hard for me to say I recommend less instructional time. With that being said, I understand the desire for a lot of families to travel earlier. I understand the need for teachers to do the same. And I also understand that this is a small measure from the board of appreciation for what they've gone through as we come into this time of year. So yeah, I would be in favor of it.
Gail?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is this just for this current year, or is this going to be going forward?
It's just for this year's calendar.
Other questions? Claire?
I think it's a really great idea. I know that as a teacher and when you're getting ready for the holiday, that little bit of extra time can mean a lot to the families, kids, even if you're not traveling. And it still counts as a full day of school, so it's not affecting the school days.
Other questions, comments? My thoughts are, I too am in support of this. We certainly know our teachers have been through a lot over the past almost 2 years. Our students have been through a lot over the past almost 2 years. It seems like it will be mutually beneficial, and it certainly is one of many ways that we can certainly acknowledge that we hear you and we appreciate your effort. And so with that, if there are no other questions or discussion, in response to the motion on the floor, all of those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. The Thursday before the break is a Wednesday schedule. Continuing on to staff communication and reports, superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you very much. A couple pieces of information. Our vaccine clinics continue tomorrow night at Charter Oak and Whiting Lane. These would be second shots for those age 5 to 11 that have already gotten their first shot. These are from 3 to 8. And I just want to thank Juan Melian and Karen Cookish, but so many of our administrators that have gone to help host these. We're not the deliverer of the vaccines, and we're providing the space, but for them to spend that extra time during this time, and we've had long lines at different times, and people have been remarkably patient, and it's greatly appreciated. Our partnership with UConn, the UConn Health Center is continuing to accept walk-in appointments for those 5 to 11. So we urge people to continue to. We're up to around 50% now of those age 5 to 11 in West Hartford with at least their first shot. And while we have seen certainly an increase, anybody that follows the letters home from Dr. Morrow knows that we're in a COVID surge, which happens typically after Thanksgiving, as it did last year. This is when we saw a surge. Last year's surge was larger than this one, as far as not just both cases and quarantines. And we've seen our quarantine numbers certainly not where they were last year. We were on a call today with the state epidemiologist, and they talked about what we're seeing. And certainly, our mitigation strategies, the good news through this is they're still working. What we're seeing is family and community spread. If we were seeing spread within the schools, if we were seeing that dramatic spread happen, that we couldn't, through contact tracing, identify where a child was getting it or what was the logical nexus of this, then we'd be recommending some changes perhaps. But that isn't the case. The schools still seem to be one of the safest places that kids can be. Even when you look at the case rate versus the state overall in our schools, even when we do have these surges, we track them back to family events, we track them back to neighborhood events, and sometimes sleepovers, which it is what it is, and that's something that we have seen. Boosters open to the town Friday and Saturday at Connard from 3 to 6 on Friday and 10 to 3. Booster shots are available. Our staff has been getting boosters, and that's also open to the community. The state is hosting a webinar on Thursday, December 16th from 5 to 6 p.m. This is in everybody's newsletters from the schools. This is Staying in School Safely During COVID-19, an evening with Connecticut medical experts for parents and families. This is being put on by the state. It will be recorded afterwards. Parents can register. That information is in your school newsletter. So that's a little over a week from now. And some really good news to share that's just becoming public. Jamal Hines, as you guys know, who's presented here, who assistant principal at Connard High School, and truly one of the more decent human beings I've known, one of the great people to be around. He makes you feel better about being in his presence, and he does that for our kids, as I'm sure you know, Andrew. Anybody at Connard does. He's one of the hearts and souls of Connard, and he's done tremendous work with our future educators diversity. And it gives me great pleasure to announce we had a visiting committee come by, interview families, teachers, members of the leadership team, Julio, and the Connecticut Association of Schools has named Jamal Hines as the Assistant Principal of the Year for 2022. So great news. Great news for our friend Jamal, Jamal Hines is just a pleasure to be around. I'm going to ask Rosina Haskins, Dr. Haskins, and Paul Vicinas to come forward. And one of the things I want to do as part of the superintendent's update is there's a difference between not listening and not agreeing. And I think that's important for people to recognize. And they've been doing work throughout this time, listening to people talking about the work that has created some attention, and in terms of how we present ideas to our kids to help them explain the world around them, themselves, their friends, their families, their teachers in some cases. And so I'm going to ask Paul and Rosina to talk a little bit.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. As Tom mentioned, there's been a lot of attention, a lot of inquiries that have come, whether to the board, certainly to the schools and to the district office, and specifically even media attention regarding our treatment of gender equity. And gender equity is a fraction of our overall larger SEL curriculum. But that is where the attention and the inquiries have been focused. And some of that reporting, specifically some national reporting from media outlets outside of the state of Connecticut, have really served to misrepresent the actual content and the actual goals of what is in our curriculum, and created, I think, some of the confusion and perhaps some of the unrest. And so we're here and we're happy to have the opportunity to try to address this and try to kind of set the record straight and give some clarity around our work and specifically our commitments.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Superintendent Moore, for including the SCL civics curriculum in your superintendent's update. And we're happy to have this opportunity to provide larger framing and points of clarification on this topic. We will speak specifically, we can speak specifically to the identity portion or gender identity portion of our curriculum, since that's what's relevant in our public comments tonight and in the past month. But we think it's important for the newer board members and members of the viewing public who might be new to the topic to have a little bit of context and brief background. So, social emotional learning, SEL, stands for social emotional learning. During the September 9th and October 19th board meetings, we provided an update and a full presentation to the board in which we shared the intersection between SEL and equitable educational opportunities for all children, not some children, but all children. So both of those board reports, we won't rehash that, but both of those board reports are available on our district website. The full presentation recording is available on WHC Interactive, and join me at the board table that evening, where we had student voices, and we had my colleagues, our educators. So our elementary SEL civics framework is based on the Connecticut Social Studies standards. And it is aligned with the CASEL framework. CASEL stands for the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning. And it is essentially a research-based set of competencies that parents and educators can teach and model for students to develop social, emotional, academic, healthy skills for success, whether in the classroom or in the community. And so there are 5 essential competencies. There's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, responsible decision-making, and relationship skills. And self-awareness really is promoting the ability to understand one's own emotions, thoughts, feelings, values, and how they influence behavior across contexts. Self-management has to do with self-regulation and managing and regulating your own emotions, your behavior, and sometimes stress. Social awareness are the abilities to understand the perspectives of and to empathize with others, including those from diverse backgrounds, cultures, and contexts. Responsible decision-making is really having the ability to make caring and responsible and constructive choices in your personal behavior, social interactions across diverse contexts again. And then relationship skills. Relationships matter. And so it's really helping students to develop and establish and maintain healthy relationships, supportive relationships, and to effectively navigate new settings in diverse contexts and situations among individuals and groups. We are a very richly robust, diverse community. And so all of these skills come together cohesively in a program that we use at the elementary level, and I'm going to talk specifically about elementary SEL, within our morning meeting structure, and that program is called Second Step. And Second Step grounds itself in SEL and the progression of its lessons. So for example, kindergarten, apologizing can help. A student might have that kind of a lesson. Or in first grade, I'm feeling frustrated. Or fourth grade, saying it respectfully. So the progression of the lessons They're also adapted from Learning for Justice, and that is an anti-bias social justice framework, and it serves as our lever for equity. And there are 4 domains, that is identity, diversity, justice, and action. And we're going to unpack identity in just a moment, but in terms of the structure, the SEL civics curriculum, it's a total makeup of about 80 to 100 lessons per grade throughout the entire year. And it consists of 1 second step lesson per grade per week and 1 to 2 SEL, social justice, or civics lessons per week. So there are about over 100 titles that support the lessons. The majority of the questions that we have received, as Paul talked about, focus on 1 individual lesson per year on gender identity. And so before we can unpack gender identity, it's really important to understand that these lessons are framed under the civic social justice identity domain and based on the SELSJ framework. And the overarching goal of that instruction under the identity domain is really to promote the understanding of the various characteristics that make up our uniqueness and our sameness, and how identity does affect relationships in schools and in classrooms. So this concept of identity has, natural connections with the CASO essential skills that I described earlier. So while gender is a very important aspect of identity, our curriculum is much broader than gender identity and does explore multiple dimensions of identity, such as race, ethnicity, language, nationality, faith, and family structure, and more. But we know it's clear that we need to speak specifically to our treatment of gender identity and gender equity at the elementary level, and to just kind of clarify some of those misrepresentations and misconceptions.
So, given what I hope you heard in terms of kind of some of the scope, which is really served to make this issue feel bigger, feel like it's representative of our entire curriculum. Some of the other misrepresentations that I've heard, because I've had the opportunity to read emails, we've had the opportunity to dialogue, we've seen things, and it seems that there are concerns or claims that either conflate or confuse our work on gender stereotypes and gender expression with that of indoctrination. And that's a specific quote. Conflating our efforts to enable students to be accepting and respectful of differences, which is our goal, with that of overtly teaching students to recognize differences, critique differences within each other, which is not our goal. We've heard claims that seem to confuse our efforts to provide students with the windows and the mirrors for the vast diversity that exists within our schools, and to teach them to appreciate the common bonds of our community and respect individual differences, with claims that we're asking students to grapple with the complexity of those differences, which is not true. We've heard concern from parents in terms which I translate into asking for input as to what types of differences might we acknowledge? What types of differences might we opt into or opt out of? Which student groups, which cultures, which identities, which students should be ignored? That last set of concerns really reflects conflating our effort to recognize and respect the diverse forms of identity that exist in the community with that of an attempt on our part to impose values that would be more appropriately placed with the family. So we're here to provide, hopefully, some corrections, some clarifications, try to clear up some of those misrepresentations of our work, and any ambiguities that exist on our own part through we recognize we can do better with communication. So we begin with our why, and it's our shared values. It's our mission statement. It's our Board of Education policies, and they are replete. There are numerous references within multiple Board of Education policies regarding our responsibilities within our instructional program to, and this is a quote, value, recognize, and address the needs of all children, as well as to promote student understanding and appreciation for cultural and individual differences. All right, that exists well beyond our equity policy. The simple fact is that we have had students across nearly every single one of our elementary schools who are either gender nonconforming, gender questioning, or exhibiting preferences, typically in their dress or their appearance, that are gender non-traditional. That's the simple truth. We have had families and students who have requested from us acknowledgement and respect for their expressed personal pronouns or to be called by something other than their legal name. There's clear guidance for school districts from the state of Connecticut, written in statute, regarding our responsibilities to respect such requests.
So I can talk about the what of our curriculum. So we acknowledge that there are differing opinions and for some religious overtones on the topic of gender identity. And so that being said, our position is not to promote or defend or debate or refute a family's personal point of view, nor to engage in discussion of values other than our shared values that Paul just articulated. And that is really to ensure that every child feels safe, welcome, valued, accepted, and respected within our school community. So the what of our curriculum really rests within a simple set of learning targets. Within our primary grades, those targets are, one, I can express who I am. So I'm Rosina, and I'm of Jamaican heritage. I'm happy and proud of that. Two, I can show respect to others when they express who they are. I respect Paul's active duty military service, would be an example. I can identify examples of gender stereotypes. So growing up, I remember thinking that only men could be engineers and scientists, and I see that there's a world of possibilities for people just like me. And so in grades 4 and 5, we maintain those 3 learning targets, but we add a final one, and that is I can be respectful of others and refer to them by their pronouns, by their preferred nicknames or salutation. So those are the 3 learning targets. That's the what, and then 4 for 4th and 5th grade.
Those are the goals. Those are the curricular goals. The how of the approach and the larger discussion of identity and diversity of identities, the how we do it is to offer reflections that foster the development of a positive self-concept in terms of expressing who I am, and a positive view of the diversity within our collective identities to promote empathy and respect for others, how I show respect for others. We do this through a series of read-aloud stories and companion lessons in which teachers facilitate a developmentally appropriate discussion based on the age of the child in support of the 4 learning targets that Rosina identified. Specific book that was actually mentioned this evening earlier, Pink is for Boys. It's a kindergarten book. The storyline attempts to model that preferences of favorite colors, game, play, needn't be limited to any gender. That's the storyline of the book. Within the lesson guide, a suggested question for discussion is, do boys and girls play different things at recess? Have you ever been told that you can't join in because of your gender identity, because you're a boy, because you're a girl, you can't play this game with us? That's a kindergarten lesson example. I heard earlier this evening that I think I heard it potentially misrepresented, misunderstood. I'm not casting aspersions, that we were trying to teach those gender differences, when in fact our goal is exactly the opposite. In the kindergarten book, Introducing Teddy, book on gender identity, the storyline describes a teddy bear who tells his friend that he's actually a girl teddy, not a boy teddy, and wishes to be called Tilly instead of Thomas. Within the lesson guide, a suggested question for children is, how does Ava, another character in the book, react when Errol, the owner of the teddy bear, tells her that Tilly has a new name? What does she say? Is Ava being a good friend to Tilly the teddy? And how did it make Tilly feel? That is the how in a developmentally appropriate way for a kindergarten student. For either of these read aloud lessons, there are also optional activities that teachers might engage in with students. Throughout most of the two above stories, the characters are playing their favorite games, riding bikes, climbing trees, etc., to reflect common interests that children would have at this age level. Optional activities could be things where students create drawings to express their favorite things, their favorite activities, in an effort to promote confidence in their own self-identity and providing them an outlet to express who they are.
So we hope that this brief framing and clarifying points about the equity goals of the SEL civics curriculum, and specifically we hope that this provides a better understanding about the learning targets for gender stereotypes, gender expression, and overall gender equity, but identity, valuing everyone's identity. And so this really isn't just like we keep talking about our policy. Yeah, our policy grants the right of every student to feel entitled to an authentic sense of safety and belonging, but it's also our promise to our students, and it is our ethical responsibility. And so we do feel we have been listening, and we want to be responsive to families, but our students, they are our North Star. And so our partnerships with our parents and our caregivers and the community stakeholders, it continues to be central to our work. We're not tone deaf. We want to ensure that we create inclusive and safe, welcoming environments for all of our students. We prefer to do that in partnership with our parents and caregivers. So, this is just brief framing and clarifying some of the misunderstandings based on what we've heard. But families or community members who are seeking to really gain deeper understanding of what we are doing, rather than debating what we're not doing, you can access more detailed information on our website, probably right after this meeting. On the WHPS website, we'll have, make sure that information and communication goes out through all of our elementary school newsletters, so families don't have to search for it, and we're open to other communication vehicles to get the message out about what we are doing and why we feel so passionate and strong about it.
All right, thank you for the superintendent's report. Questions, teammates? Ari, and then Andrew, and then Ari.
First of all, thank you. That was actually really clarifying for a few of the points. My question is, I know some parents in the past have brought up that after some of the lessons, their children were confused on certain points, and I'm sure that's like part of the process of learning new things. I'm just wondering if, and I'm sure you've received like more parents' emails or teachers' emails about any possible confusion that's arisen, but have there been attempts to respond to general points of confusion that may have come up, that once the curriculum was like actually implemented, you realized maybe there was something that could be made more clear?
So certainly, thank you, Andrew, for the question. A lot of those conversations happen, and I've been made privy to some of them. If there was a point of confusion or a question that came home, and it's like any other topic, which is either a sensitive topic or we have a specific board policy on controversial topics, where the treatment, if there's something that's a question that's more appropriately answered at home, it is referred to home, and then at times the parent may reach out directly, may be speaking with a teacher or principal, and get that clarification to understand what some of that grounding was. To that end, we want to be able to provide, as Dr. Haskins just said, more transparency around some of the texts and some of the books. So I know you promised right after this meeting, I'm going to ask for tomorrow that we will have all of that information up and available. We'll have the full list of all of our mentor texts, all 80 to 100 of them per grade level, with a short synopsis, so that information can be available to any parent. We've also been responsive, and I'll just mention this because one of the texts that was brought up by a very articulate speaker earlier this evening that talked about a particular young lady who was standing in front of a group of police officers. The part that's misunderstood, misrepresented in some of the concerns that are then shared out publicly and repeated is that those pages were excluded from our curriculum. And when we saw it and we had more conversation in around that text, the text has been removed. It's been removed for several weeks. We don't necessarily have kind of the window or the outlet to express that, but there's a lot of misinformation that goes on where we have the opportunities to have the conversations. We can correct some of that, but a lot of this, because it is a sensitive topic for some, there is a jump to some conclusions that aren't correct, that aren't in the spirit with what we're trying to do, and they're generally, when you listen to what people are concerned about and what they're saying, there's generally a lot of agreement around the goal of making all students feel welcome, safe, and included, and that's our bottom line goal.
Thank you.
All right. I just wanted to thank you for the further clarification today. I don't really have a question, but more along the lines of a comment. I know there's been a lot of controversy around this particular topic with regard to SEL, but as a professional who works day in and day out with children as young as 9, as old as 18, who have significant mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, self-harming behaviors, have been the victims of bullying, have low self-esteem as a direct result of their gender identity not being recognized or validated or accepted by peers, by classmates, and oftentimes by their own family. I want to thank you for making school a place where children spend a good 6 hours of their day by providing them a safe space and normalizing behaviors that maybe others are not doing for them. And I hope through this curriculum and starting as early as elementary school that I see less and less kids coming in as a direct result of not being seen, recognized, validated for who they are as a person. So thank you very much.
Ethan.
Thank you. I wasn't here for the presentations before, but what you said makes sense. The question is the execution, which I don't know. But I did hear you mention, and it would appear from the the people who spoke and the emails that have come in on the website, although I screwed up on the password now, so I'm blocked, is the communication. And I heard you mention several times the communication isn't working quite, and I don't want to put the wrong words in. How do we fix that, I guess, because I come from a world of continuous improvement, so my question is, we are where we are today. And like you said, one of the books got discontinued, I don't know if that's been communicated to parents. Is there a way to improve the communication? I heard parents forum to me, because to me, parents are in a way the consumers, and not you can't make everybody happy, but we should be listening, and that's my concern is, are we responding effectively? And I realize perception is always there, and you're not going to make everybody happy. But certainly is there ways we can improve the communication, I guess is where it's going.
Absolutely. No, thanks, Ethan. And absolutely, you know, I think we own that. I own that in terms of how can we better communicate. And, you know, the first step was the opportunity this evening during the superintendent's update to be able to even just provide a public forum for that. The next step that we're taking, as we said, first in terms of, you mentioned specifically what books are out there, the ability to preview the books. We'll have up tomorrow on our website a newsletter, an electronic newsletter that anyone can click onto, and they can get kind of an overview of the entire SEL curriculum to include the pieces in there on gender stereotypes and the pieces in there on gender identity. They'll be able to have the full list of books, every book, whether folks had concerns about, you know, any questions in terms of our social emotional learning. I heard a concern that was referenced on social emotional learning tonight. I heard a concern that was mentioned on some of our social justice, and I certainly heard concerns on the gender. They'll be able to see all of those books, as well as the books that Rosina talks about in terms of how do you ask for permission, how do you be respectful of a peer, things like that. So they'll be able to see every title, and then it is no effort whatsoever for, you know, to be able to Google a lot of these titles, to be able to get the full text of the book online through a read aloud, through YouTube, or through other venues. We'll also be following up with principals at the elementary level and asking them to provide a short blurb in all of their outgoing newsletters, the newsletters that are coming up, that say that announces the presence on the website of this information, and directing those people who are interested to go and seek more information. You talked about execution, and, you know, we're a big district, and as we do this, there's always going to be some friction points as people go through this. We've heard feedback from parents, which I'm certain, you know, at some level comes from some feedback that they've had in communicating with their teacher about, you know, their confidence, their readiness. And some people are already expert at this. We have teachers that are kind of operating in a train-the-trainer model, that are working with their peers to help support the work. We have other teachers that kind of need a script and need to stay close to it, and that's what we recommend. That's why we have lesson guides that are there with example questions for discussion, like those that I read, and that is essentially you know, the meat and potatoes of what we're asking, which is not a complex thing, which does not require dramatic training, if they're following the intent, which is to help to make all students feel acknowledged and welcomed. That's what teachers do every day. But we have the opportunity through our early release Wednesdays, through our CSIs, to provide professional learning. We have professional learning on these topics scheduled throughout the year. So we have a lot of pieces that are in place, some of which are known, some of which are not known by the public at all times. And so again, I think there's a lot of statements made, a lot of assumptions about how well or how not well the machine is oiled and how it's running. And that's why we're very happy to be able to have the opportunity to really provide some clarification to this board and to our public.
So if I could just follow up. So if you can be proactive, because I think, I'm going to script the quote, but there's something to the effect of where there's a vacuum, you know, there's misinformation or whatever, you know, a vacuum of information. So if there's a way to communicate it, to say, you know, like, here's where we've changed the program, I think that'd be important, because right now I'm not aware of that. I mean, frankly, if the way to do is go through there, I was trying to see how do I read some of these things, so I hear about it, because I don't know.
Well, I think that's important. The only thing I'll push back on is I don't think there's been a vacuum. I mean, we've presented on this previously. It's been in newsletters. Videos were sent out to families. This was communicated. This wasn't out of the blue. So I'll say that first. Secondly, that kind of goes with that. In terms of the controversy and I do want to say it's not all the letters are on one side. That's quite clear. And when I gave a quote, Ronnie and other members of the media, I was talking specifically about a National Review article. I was careful. Every other time I spoke to people, I'm not talking about any West Hartford parent. I said specifically, they can contact their teacher and their principal and have discussions. I'm talking about an outside news source that wrote an article that creates controversy as a design, that never once contacted me, that never once contacted West Hartford, that put out information from an outside source, not from West Hartford. So the reason we're putting this all up there isn't because we're apologizing for something. That's something I want to make clear. It's because we express what we do because we're not ashamed of it to anyone. We're the only district that sends letters out every night. If you think I want to send a letter out with Dr. Morrow saying, yeah, 13 kids tested positive, trust me, I don't, because I know what that equals in the morning. We have a district website that lists all of our cases and the number of people that are in quarantine. I know that that leads to a loop feedback, but that's okay because we're going to be out front of it and we're going to be transparent. That's what we're doing with this. That's why it's out there. Not to apologize for any of it, because we stand by all of it. And that doesn't mean that we don't hear people. It means we don't always agree. And that's okay. But when we talk about who we stand with, in the past 4 weeks, the people that have reached out to me, pulled me aside, talked about how our work has not just affirmed who they are, but has made them feel a part of the West Hartford community. I know that there are people that have left, but I had a discussion today with a family that moved here specifically and bought their home because of this news. I have Education Week that wants to interview me and post our district as an example in the work we've done. I have District Leader that wants to do a podcast about this nationally. We have districts contacting Dr. Haskins every day because this work is so needed. So I want to make clear, and I understand what you're saying, Ethan. I'm not pushing back on you because listen, when there's a communication problem, I'm the first to say, I could have done it better. If it's a misinterpretation, misunderstanding, then clearly we didn't do what we should have done. But I don't want it to come across as, well, we're apologizing, we're rolling back. No, we're trying to make everybody understand accurately, this is what we're doing, and here's what it is.
No, I understand, but my point was more perception does become reality. But more importantly is, from what you said, you've made some changes, and I think that's important for people to hear that you're listening as opposed to this is it, and because that hasn't, to me, come through. So.
Jason, then Claire, and then Gail.
Great. Yes. Thank you for describing more the details and the process and the pedagogy behind the curriculum that you've presented, and that we can get a deeper layer of what you've presented in the past. And I wanted to ask you to reflect on some of what I think are some of the most important research outcomes from the CASTLE, from the Collaborative for Academic, Social, Emotional Learning. To me, it sounds like, as a 25-year-old organization, that some of the insights to me that feel the most important are about the ways that those different forms of learning work together, right? And I think that speaks to me some of the other misconceptions that I've heard, that SEL is a distraction, that it's experimenting on kids. Understanding the research that's come behind these frameworks, I think could help develop a deeper sense of the ways that social emotional learning makes the other subjects deeper and connects students more wholly to the school, to their classroom experience. And then, more as a comment, my work with the state's Hate Crimes Advisory Council, we're also concerned with violence in schools, and the Government Accounting Office has released reports that violence in schools is up, and gender and sexuality based violence is the second most common form of violence in schools. These lessons are incredibly important and in preventative measures. Not all schools have this or do this kind of work, and their districts are working with the consequences. So I'm grateful for the work that you've put into this, and I think our district is better off for it. But I would love to hear your guys' understanding of the Castle framework and how it situates with a broader set of curriculum.
Thank you, Jason. We, the pedagogy, the frameworks, it's backed by decades of research, just like Castle. Those are research-based competencies, and essentially it promotes conditions to enable all children to reach their full potential. We think about students with disabilities, gender, really encompassing opportunities for students to, when they're able to better manage their emotions, right? They're better able to access, information. Oftentimes, sometimes we have students, especially in times of COVID, coming back and feeling that sense of fight or flight. And when students feel like that, they can't learn. And so this is a responsive classroom approach. And I think to your point, we can certainly cite lots of research when we put the information out. When I said after this meeting, I didn't mean like immediately after this meeting. I meant after we go to sleep and wake up in the morning and we click on whps.org. It'll be on our website, but we can certainly include that information. But it really is an equity lever. We've seen research in terms of like 50 years of research, the Coleman study, for example, where we've seen significant percentage gains in numeracy and literacy among students when we apply the SEL as a lever for equity. And so that's information that we recognize and appreciate that many people are coming into this conversation and this understanding from a different quadrant of, the compass, whether it's intellectual. And so we'll make sure that we have that data to back that. We certainly have it, and that's what we've utilized. We didn't do this in a vacuum. We did this with, diverse groups of people, including our parents. We had many parents on our different parent work groups that come with lots of educational background and lived experiences. And so that accounts for something as well, too, not just, what the experts out in the field say, but hearing from our students, as we did at the last board presentation, their lived experiences, too, is also a data source. We also recognize that there are people who are coming into this conversation and understanding based on a moral, ethical conviction. There are people who are just ready to act and then coming from it through the emotional appeal. And so we truly see SEL as an equity lever for all students, not some students, for all students, and it's backed by decades of research.
Claire? So I wasn't on the Board of Ed, but I did watch the Board of Ed with the SEL presentation from staff and students. And it sounds like a lot of work went into it, with parents being involved, teachers being involved. When it comes to actually implementing, though, if you imagine 11 schools, you might have 33, 35 kindergarten teachers. So those mentor techs are there for them to select from. But also, you're giving the script, because not everyone has the same comfort level. But as a teacher, you're always reflecting. And as administrators and curriculum writers, you're reflecting, and you're changing, and you're adapting. And so I like that there is a script for those that might not have it so comfortable, and each year you improve your teaching. I actually sit in an SEL group for 20 minutes every single day with 24 first graders. And it's an amazing experience, and it's about community, and it's about belonging, and it's about being accepted for who you are. Many things come up, and so I think it's really important to see SEL as that whole sense of there's a place for me, and I belong here, and there's people who care about me, and those guiding questions that you have, the guidelines, allow any teacher to enter with materials to do the best they can and to change over time. So I hope the professional development continues. I think the conversations are great, but I think it's good work that you're doing, and I'm proud to be doing my part in my school every day.
Gail.
Thank you. Well, I'm really glad you're here because we've had quite a wild week with all kinds of communication going back and forth. My experience maybe is a little bit different than the superintendent's. Most of the people that, and the communications I've seen have been very concerned about what is being brought into the elementary school in terms of gender. I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I agree that we want every child in the school system to feel welcome and to feel that they have a place. But I feel that from what I'm hearing from parents, is that we are not doing a good job in terms of involving our parents in some of what is being taught in the schools. I guess I'm not exactly saying that in the exact way that I want to, but I feel that I think that parents feel that when you bring a subject matter that's coming into now kindergarten, first grade, second grade, revolving around gender, that they feel that they should also have something or have a place to discuss that with you. And I think that we haven't really done a good job in terms of allowing the parents to have a forum or a place where they can bring their concerns to, be it you, or maybe it's supposed to be brought somewhere else. So I think that we need to maybe find a way to let people be heard and bring their concerns to either both of you or other places. That's just my comment. I've received many communications this week about people being very concerned about what's going on in the elementary school. I had one follow-up question also, something that Jason said about research. And mine is probably a little bit more specific. Are there studies out there in a less general way that do talk about or do show that there is a benefit to promoting or bringing in this material into the elementary school? And I'm speaking specifically on gender. And if there are, is it possible that we can get those research?
Yeah, there's several. There's the Trevor study, more dealing with more teenage, adolescent, upper grade.
Specifically
No,
for
I know,
elementary.
but there's guidance from that we get. They don't wake up as teenagers, they're living experiences, and as they become teenagers, we've had our own teenagers say, I wish I had this in elementary school. This would have been more freeing for me. We also have, I think one of our most reputable resources is genderspectrum.org, and that's filled with lots of rich current and past research. And I don't want to just limit it to gender, because there's also a piece where we use Zaretta Hammond's culturally responsive teaching in the brain, and that has implications too for allowing students to express themselves, to learn, grow, and develop, feel the sense of respect and acceptance too. I don't know, I'm trying to think of some of the other studies right off the top of my head, but we've amassed a lot. We've really dug into a lot of it specific to, the 4 domains of identity, diversity, justice, and action, but specific to gender identity, gender expression, and guidance from gender stereotypes. We can include that information on our website as well.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? All right, well, Thank you all very much for the superintendent's update. Thank you.
Might as well stay, Paul.
Yes, Mr. Vicenius, please do stay. We're moving right on to under staff communications and reports. The second piece, staff reports and board discussions, 2021 school day SAT results.
Thank you, and I welcome Ann McKernan with me, our Director of Secondary Education. And it's a privilege to be able to report. I do apologize to our viewing public. Apparently our projector is down, so I will make the PowerPoint that I've shared in hard copy with our board available to the public as a companion to the written report that is already up on the Board of Education website. I'll be presenting tonight on the 2021 school day SAT results. 2021 SAT was taken during last school year, during the 2021 school year, in the month of March or April, I believe. If you look quickly at the agenda slide, we'll talk a little bit about the background of the SAT itself as a formal state assessment. We'll talk a little bit about the context of the impact of the pandemic on our state assessments as we have in the past. We'll talk specifically about how it impacted both the administration and the interpretation of results for the SAT. Certainly we'll share with you overall results and trends and disaggregate our results as we have traditionally, and then offer any opportunity for questions. All right, so turning to the slide on background, the SAT, especially for members of the Board of Education who are new, if you haven't been following kind of the SAT, I know if I weren't in education, I wouldn't necessarily follow changes to the SAT, but the SAT did have a major overhaul back in 2016 when it changed from the SAT that I took as a high school student, which had 3 sections. It used to have critical reading, writing, and mathematics. It limited it down to 2, evidence-based reading and writing, and mathematics, and it changed a lot of the content within each of those areas. In the English language arts, it focuses more heavily on command of evidence, analyzing a source, and words in context. And in mathematics, it focuses in on 3 essential areas, that of algebra, problem solving, and a bucket they just simply refer to as advanced mathematics. There is a benchmark score that's given that we'll talk a little bit more about on the next slide. But before I go there, I want to talk about some of the caveats for the interpretation of the 2021 results. These are the same general caveats that we've talked about when we've talked about our Smarter Balanced results, and we've talked about our talked a little bit about the AP results, so there wasn't a big caveat on interpretation of scores. It was really just how the test itself changed. There was a requirement for the SAT in March of last year that if you wanted to take it, you had to physically come into the school to be present. So there was an impact in terms of our students who were choosing to access their education remotely, and whether or not they did participate in the test. Generally, as you read in the report, we have about 99% participation of eligible students, and last year we dropped, I think it was somewhere between 91 and 92% of students participating in the test. It is a free SAT that's paid for by the state of Connecticut. It's exactly the same SAT that you could kind of sign up for and take on a Saturday administration. The big difference between our school day SAT scores and our Saturday scores is that our school day scores are taken by, generally again, close to 100% of the population. Our Saturday administrations, typically about 80 to 85% of juniors are taking that. When the state disaggregated results this year for the SAT, they did so based on attendance patterns for students. So they broke students into 3 categories: those who had full or nearly full attendance, something in the neighborhood of 75% of days attended in school in person. Those who were considered partially attended or hybrid, students that had attendance anywhere between 25 to 75% of the time, which was the majority of our high school population because we were in hybrid for so long. And then students who were considered remote who had less than 25% of physical attendance within the building. And they have not published those results. They've published those results on the state website, but they have not published them on EdSite Secure. They're not including them for trend reporting. They're not including them for any of the accountability scoring. They're basically saying that school was sufficiently disrupted last year that you shouldn't make overarching assumptions about performance. Now, all that being said, the West Hartford results were generally not that far off from typical, so you'll see that in later slides. If I could draw your attention to the second slide on background where you have the literacy and the mathematics headings and a couple of numbers there, I just want to talk about what the state has defined as goal. As you know, the average score for the SAT is determined to be in and around 500. The state has set benchmarks for literacy at a 480 and benchmark or goal for mathematics at a 530. And they came by those numbers through research, basically identifying a 75% or better chance of earning a grade of C or higher in a corresponding freshman course in college. All right. You will notice when we get to our results, kind of the difference between the 480 and the 530 in terms of how they stack. So if I'll turn your attention to the next slide where it's school day results and you see a lot of blue bars. If it, you know what, and I apologize, I'm looking at these bigger ones and they didn't print as nicely as they would have displayed. So it's cut off, looks like some of the right hand side, I didn't notice that. But I think you get. I can talk you through the important points on the visual. First and foremost, that you see that overall, when you're looking at average score between a 6-year trend for literacy or mathematics, literacy on the left, mathematics on the right, with the years kind of going from left to right. So the darker blue bar represents the 2021 performance for average score. First and foremost, you can see that the general trend is the average scores are relatively stable, relatively in the same place. You see that for 2021, as we would expect, we did have a slight dip, but not a dramatic dip in the overall average score. But what's more interesting is you see that overall, the average score in mathematics for West Hartford students over the 6-year trend and the average score for literacy are pretty darn close. And that's important to note because the black bar that's drawn is the goal bar. And you can see by virtue of the scores that the goal bar for literacy, that 480, is substantially lower than the 530. And that's simply based on, as was stated, the probability of earning a C or above in a freshman course. When you turn the slide to the next page, kind of the impact of that reflects itself a little bit more dramatically. Historically, we've had about 79% of students achieve that 480 goal for literacy. Last year we had 79.4% achieve it. The 79, I'm sorry, I said that in reverse. The light blue is the previous 5-year average and the dark blue is the 2021 score. So historically we've had 79.4% of kids get to the goal. Last year we had 79. Very, very much on par with our historical performance. Historically, we've had just under 60%, 59.8% of students hit the bar for math. Last year we had 58%. So very, very close. Although, very modest dips for both. What's important to note is it looks like, wow, we're not doing as well in mathematics. The ability for us to get roughly 60% of our kids to goal in mathematics is actually a stronger performance relative to the state and the DIRG than is the nearly 80% of students for literacy. And more importantly, when you kind of look just backwards one slide, overall, the average score on the two tests is relatively equal. So this college and career ready benchmark, it's an important number, but I'm kind of here to try to convince you that we are doing a very good job overall on both components of the test. There was a question that I received or anticipated. How did the state of Connecticut do? So this isn't on the slide, but just to put these bars in context and our general performance in context, the state of Connecticut last year only had 58% of students achieve goal in literacy, so we were about 20 points above, and that was about a 5-point drop from the state's typical average. You'll notice we were basically right on par. We didn't have that 5-point drop. And in math last year, the state only had about 36% of its students achieve goal. That's down from an average for the state of about 40%. So we're about 20 points above the state average. And again, we had a modest drop of about 2 points. The state had a drop of about 4 points. So again, we're doing pretty well. And as you read in our report, while we're not supposed to do comparisons with the DIRG, I did. And it was actually the first time that we have outperformed our DIRG. And that's really evidence of the work of our teachers and I think the strength of our model last year. So I'm very happy about that. If you turn the page, the next two slides are going to talk about our performance of our high needs subgroup. And our high needs subgroup, especially for those of you new on the board, high needs subgroup is the students with disabilities, our English language learners, students who are not English proficient, and our students with socioeconomic need, as identified by participation in the free and reduced priced lunch program. All right, those students have been categorized by the state of Connecticut as high need. They generally have a significant achievement gap in terms of their performance, and so and this is lost on my poor attempt to have this out because you can't see how far those blue bars stretch. But I'll tell you that the center line at 0, the red is the performance of the high needs group for the state of Connecticut. So that in the top bar is 2021. So you can see that the red bar is much, not much, but substantially shorter than the other red bars that the state had previously had. Typically, the state had about 35% of the high needs performance group achieving goal. West Hartford has had between 45 and 55% of its high needs students achieving goal in literacy. Last year we were at 53.6. We were down slightly from our high the previous year, which just hit 55%. So we do have a gap, clearly, between our high needs group and the district overall, but the level of fall off due to COVID and all the disruption was marginal. Was only 1.5 points for our high needs students. Was less than a point for the district overall. So it was not a dramatic. It wasn't on the shoulders of the high needs group. Turning the page for math, you see similarly, historically, we had averaged for our high needs population in mathematics, we had averaged in and around 30% of students hitting benchmark. We had 31.6 last year. That's a drop off from our high the previous year of 35%. And you can see the relative comparison. The state also had a significant drop off from its high in the previous year of about 15%. So we're at about double the rate of students hitting the college career ready benchmark in mathematics than our state, and but we did see a fairly substantial drop in that area. Lastly, we do look at the distribution of scores for students of color. For this, I put students of color, I put our black students, our Hispanic students, and our students identifying as 2 or more races into one group so that there's a sufficient number of students in the group to be able to make, make a look at things. There was there was relatively no change in overall performance. We're talking a point or a fraction of a point for the literacy, with 60% of students of color hitting benchmark last year. In mathematics, we had jumped up to a high of nearly 40% of students of color, and we dropped down to 33.5%. So that is a substantial drop, and it still positions us well relative to the state of Connecticut. The state of Connecticut, by comparison, for literacy, we're at 60%. State of Connecticut last year was at 35%. In mathematics, we're at 33.5. State of Connecticut was at 15%. So we still are at levels 25 points above in literacy, 17 points above in math, and confident of the strength of our program, which and the performance of our teachers, which really kind of speaks for who deserves credit for the good scores. Last page are just some ancillary resources that you can reference if you have interest, and at this time I'd open it up for Ann and myself for any questions.
Questions? Yes, Claire.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I was curious, you had a 6% increase in mathematics in the 2018-2019 year. Was that curriculum? Can you explain what happened that saw such a huge increase in those 2 years?
Yeah, absolutely. First, thanks for noting that and highlighting. We had seen incremental increases in math. Actually, since math was named as an area of focus, I think that was some 4 years ago, we saw incremental increases over a multiple year pattern based on a lot of work that we did both in terms of curriculum and instruction, some shifts that we made. And we saw them not only in the SAT, but also in the Smarter Balance testing. It is interesting that it was a sizable jump for the SAT, and so we have spent a little bit of time to try to look at that and say, okay, was it some of the time you can predict those jumps because of the strength of the cohort? So we actually did go back and we looked at the 8th grade performance on the Smarter Balance for that cohort of kids to see were they unusually demonstrably stronger than previous cohorts, and the answer was no. It was not the strength of cohort. It was not strength cohort. I don't want to take anything away from any individual kid. You guys did great. But I think that you had some help from the teachers, from both the instruction and from some curricular shifts. So we have had multiple curricular shifts over the course of the last several years. We looked at trying to avoid some of the repetition that we have seen in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. We've looked at some of the sequencing of topics in geometry, where those topics land relative to the SAT, because the SAT does take place in March. We've had some other changes that we've noticed in terms of some practice assignments that we've provided that provide direct SAT support. We've been promoting use of the Khan Academy for several years. But this group, at the end of the day, we were kind of looking at it, we were breaking it down, get within the cohort, start to look at some of the classes that they took. There's a group of students that are in the standard Algebra 2 and or those that are advanced, whether they're in honors courses or they're accelerated by a year, and they outperformed the peer group before them by 10 points. And so that's really the cohort of kids that's responsible overall for the overall district 6-point gain. There was also students that are in some of the level 3 classes, some of the students that traditionally have had some struggle with mathematics. They outperformed the previous cohort by about 3 points. A lot of that, and again, it's a lot of the same reasons in terms of the pedagogy and the curriculum, but we are looking to see what we can do moving forward to replicate that, and we're hopeful, just like with all of our testing, that once we're outside this COVID window, that we get back on track to those year after year small gains that we've been seeing. Last thing I'll say about it is it's also it's not a question of the group was smaller, so their differences made a bigger difference. The cohort itself was actually larger by several students, so it was so it's a real gain. We're real excited about that.
Other questions? Yes, Ari.
I have a question, and I don't know who would do this research, but I'm wondering if it's, okay, well, it's kind of looking across the state, though, but I'm wondering with, with the onset of COVID and different districts responding in different manners, whether it was being remote for 2 years, whereas we've been hybrid, especially in the area of math, because I really feel that math and science is a more hands-on. Is there any research being done looking at the difference between what the school format was and then what the scores were on the SAT? Because I think that would be compelling evidence to suggest that like math and science really is that in-person, requires that in-person level of education or academics.
Well, the good news is the state has reported all of the data in 3 different learning modes.
Okay.
As Paul, I think, cited earlier, we can see the state data not as this is how West Hartford did. It's always broken into the 3 learning modes that students attended school, how they attended school. So we can look across different districts and the vast majority of high schools were in a hybrid, but there were some that were remote longer, and there were fewer that were in person longer. But we can certainly use that filter to look across different school districts and see relatively how that played out in the math.
So there's a national question here too. That's always the danger of trying to compare SATs state via state, because in Connecticut all students take it. Some states only those motivated to take it to apply for college take it, and in some places they're more of an ACT state, Midwest, so that shifts the number. The same thing actually applies to those numbers that you're asking about. I don't necessarily trust that data that much, because frankly we bring all of our kids in that were remote, and all of our kids, we urge them to come in and take those tests. In a lot of places, it was only the highly motivated that came in to take the SATs, because you had made the decision to be remote, and now we're asking you to come in to take it. So I'm not sure we're going to be able to make any dramatic conclusions. Some people have been, and then I've spoken to different superintendents about who took it, how they were, and I'm not as confident in that data, and I don't know if you'd agree with me, but.
Yeah, I know, part of your question, remote versus in person, and I'll just speak to that part. I would tell you that the state overwhelmingly, I think we've said the same thing. I've presented our performance as an aggregate, but overall, when you look across the state and you look across those breakdowns, the students that were remote had more challenge in the mathematics, saw greater declines in the trend of performance. And I think a lot of that has to do with the sequential nature of the curriculum and a lot of pedagogy with math in terms of the modeling that teachers do. I would agree with Tom, certainly on how other states, who the target audience for the SAT is. So interstate or comparing across states is a challenge. But even you talk about a challenge. You talk about the 32 flavors of ice cream. If you speak to anybody at the state who does their data, Ajit or anyone else, and the various models that school districts came up with for their instruction, 2 on, 1 off, week in, week out, it was just different everywhere. Everyone did it differently, and that's not to throw any aspersions. It's sort of like, what are the conditions under which your buildings are, the size of your community, the ability for transportation, all those different, the amount of spread, all of that. It's just hard. Anne exhibited a lot of leadership across the state, getting instructional leaders, assistant superintendents, secondary curriculum leaders together on was it weekly or bi-monthly call? And we would talk best practices. We would talk about how we're skinning this cat, what we're doing to solve this problem, and we did a lot of sharing. And that was a real positive for us because that helped us. As you know, we talked a lot last year about being nimble, being able to make changes, and a lot of that was informed by really being able to reach out and talk with colleagues from across the state, hear what they were doing, why it worked or didn't work, and to be able to get some ideas as to how we might continuously improve what we were trying to do. And I do think that overall I have looked at some of the stuff, and the one thing that I hang our hats on is the amount that we dropped. And you even looked at some of those DIRG comparisons. The amount that our DIRG dropped was much more significant. So I think we really were able to minimize the impact in a positive way. I'm sure that there could have been other improvements that we could make. I hope not to have to relive it to be able to do it, but I'm very proud of the work that our teachers did and then the work that our administrators helped lead in terms of a good model.
And I just also have to say that, thinking from a student's perspective, and you two were two students who had to come in and take this big high-stakes test, and the amount of concentration the kids offered last year through a year plus, they were in a year at that point of being home or being half and half, and for them to come in and concentrate, get these scores on a very high test, I think we want to say to them, wow, you certainly lived into our expectation.
Ethan, and then Andrew, and then Jason.
Two questions. I was curious, although I will say the state results are really depressing. But that aside, do you have objectives, or are you shooting for a number? I realize that's hard to do, but I assume the goal is always to improve, but I didn't know. And how did you meet those? I mean, the numbers are good comparison, and I realize last year wasn't.
No, this is an absolutely fair question. So there's two different ways we look at targets. Certainly within the state accountability metrics, there's a target there for they'll take this, and you'll probably won't have an opportunity to see this until a year from now because they're going to suspend the accountability, but they for this last year. But they'll take the achievement level data. And they do recognize that you do have English language learners, you do have students with disabilities. So to have the expectation that 100% of students would meet, the goal every single year, while that's of course what we would always hope for in our hearts, it's not necessarily a realistic goal. So they break this down and they create this 100-point scale district performance index (DPI), and they'll put the test on it, and they'll norm it and create a measure that a score of 75 is the standardized goal. That doesn't necessarily mean 75% of kids at goal. It's translated. So I'll give you a fuller explanation of that when we do it. But sort of a shorter, faster, better answer is we do look at some of the DIRG comparisons. We recognize that West Hartford, folks that are choosing to live in this community, we know they choose it for the schools. We know that they're also shopping in places like Farmington, Avon, Glastonbury, and some of the surrounding towns. And so being competitive within our DIRG is something that we always want to be. And truth be told, if you look at the demographics of West Hartford, by comparison to the demographics of the demographic reference group, the DIRG, we're a unicorn. We look nothing like our DIRG. And our ability to be competitive with the percentage of socioeconomically disadvantaged folks, our participation in free and reduced lunch, our percentages of English language learners that come here as a destination district with more than 70 languages spoken in homes different than English. It's a testament to what we are able to provide for education, that we are not only competitive and for the first time really able to beat the DIRG average, but if I look across some of those schools, we'd like to beat them all, would be our goal.
My second question was, is it possible to, not now, but eventually stratify it? So you get your first quintile, however you separate it, whether first quartile, second quartile? It'd be interesting to see year over year the changes. is it all just in one category, or is it?
I'll break it down by perhaps elements of the assessment itself, because we can break down the assessment, like in math, for instance, into the algebra section, or are you
No, I was
talking about
thinking, like,
students?
you have your top 20, and I'm just it could be any quartile or whatever grouping, your top 20, your bottom 25, your second 25.
Sure.
To see that is it a uniform increase, or is it?
I get you.
It'd just be interesting.
The only thing with that, with the SAT, that makes it a little more difference is it's a norm reference test where you shouldn't really see improvement nationally or here because it's recentered to 500 based on the number of takers and everything
right,
else.
yeah.
So that throws off the SAT comparison year to year. And this isn't your question, but it's something that I get a lot. Oh, you had an 8-point drop. Remember, 10 points is 1 on this, which Paul does a good job of showing because it's just an 800 scale that could have been made an 80-point scale. But so sometimes people mistake jumps or drops as bigger than they are. Not that that's part of your question. I just wanted to clarify. So that's the truth is,
No, you're right.
those quartiles should be pretty even based on how the test is
But I figure if
organized.
you're up, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
By the way, the CPA exam's the same way. So.
Yep.
Andrew?
Do you happen to know the percentage of students at Conard versus the percentage of students at Hall who fall into the high needs performance group, or like high needs students?
I don't believe I actually have that number off the top of my head, but it is available most years on EdSite. You can go on to EdSite. It's public website. It should be referenced in the last paragraph somewhere.
I can tell you a couple components just from the top of my head that go into this. Free and reduced lunch at Conard is about 31%, and at Hall is about 22%. Percentage of diversity, just in terms of students, Conard's about 47%, and Hall's about 40%. So you put those together, and you can come out with a pretty accurate representation.
And then this year's data is not included in the overall trend, but every year that's also publicly available, and you click buttons and it'll break it down for you.
All right. Jason?
Thank you. Let's see. So my question was about, is there overlap in the groups between high needs category and students of color? In particular, I'm thinking about English language learners. So in this, these are overlapping populations, right? Yeah. Yeah.
So certainly, there's two different forms of overlap. First, there's overlap right within the high needs category itself.
Yeah.
There are going to be those students that are. It's not frequent that we'll have an English language learner that's also identified as a student with disabilities, because it's difficult to tease out if a student is multiple years behind, if it's a language proficiency issue or if it's a learning disability issue. But it does happen from time to time. But there are students that have a socioeconomic need that are students with this. So you have students that could be kind of double identified just within the high needs group. But then certainly within students of color, I would say a significant number of our English language learners are gonna fall into that category. Where you certainly have students of color that are students with disabilities, as you do white students, Asian students, etc. What we have found historically to be the biggest driver out of all of it is, in terms of our achievement gap for our students of color, is not their color, it's the high needs. And within high needs, we found one of the biggest drivers for students of color to be socioeconomically disadvantaged. We've done other presentations in the past years, typically on our grade 3 through 8 data, where if we disaggregate our students of color and their achievement gap by participation in free and reduced lunch versus not, we see that it's really not a gap based on race or ethnicity. It's a gap based on that high need.
Yeah.
And that is why the state many years ago went to the high needs category, they felt like they were really misrepresenting the issue, because if the issue were about race or ethnicity, then we must have some bias in our testing, we must have
Right.
some bias in our curriculum that we could
Right.
seek to fix.
Mhm.
And that wasn't really the primary case.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Because that relates to this other question I have. I think I asked this last time, but I can't remember your response. So maybe I'll remember this time. Does the district have any information about college performance of graduates? Right. So the question that extend from that is does students of color test scores actually have, does that track out to performance in college, or is there something other than the test scores, that a broader set of education that they're getting in West Hartford Public Schools that then leads to higher performance? Or
Well,
so.
I think I can address part of your question anyway. And one is a report that we can download and have looked at this year called the Clearinghouse Report, which allows us to understand what is the persistence rate for students who go to college. So we graduate our students, they tell us where they're going, but of course, now they're individuals, and did they really go? Did they go for a second semester? Did they go back as sophomores? Did they not go at first but go second semester?
Yeah.
Did they go not at all the first year and then go? And then what is your 4, 5, and 6-year college graduation rates for students who attended your high school? So we can see persistence, we can break that down into 2-year colleges, 4-year colleges, what percentage of kids graduated at what points, what percentage of kids did not continue to persist at what point. And so that's a very valuable report. Report we look at a lot because it is kind of an ultimate outcome report. Don?
And I just want to add two things to what you just said before time goes. Two of those measures are included in the report I was referencing to Ethan, the performance profile report that typically comes out in May, the college persistence and the college acceptance.
And so, as you know, we've shared the college where people go, apply, all that information. So this, I'll be in New York Thursday for meetings about this very topic. So the data with the SATs, we dramatically outperform. And one of the things you could point to is there is a reference. The 480 and the 530, hugely controversial as far as why would you pick those? They're too high of a benchmark. Districts are always, and the College Board has literally millions of item research where they can say, no, but this is, and they can actually track grades because of their partnership with colleges in ways that we can't, because the colleges don't necessarily report to us. But what we do that augments, that allows our students to outperform, is our advanced placement. So the data that shows that not just the scores in the advanced placement, which we way outperform in scores, the fact that you take an advanced placement course, college persistence is dramatic, and it's actually one of the strongest predictors of college persistence, of did you take college level courses while in high school, and the idea being you've proven you can do college work. Even if I got a 2, not a 3 or a 4, yeah, but I got C's and B's, that means I can do college work. And so that's a key element we do here, that so West Hartford certainly outperforms what the data might suggest. If that's your question, I think, yeah.
Other questions? Yes, Avery.
A follow-up. For Hall and Conard, our programs can, such as REACH, and I think there's another one, I can't, Strive, are students in those programs counted as part of the school where their program is housed, or the school where they are districted? And do we see, I know that those two programs target students who are part of a high needs group. Do we see any differences between those? Do you understand what, between the schools they're housed in?
Sure. So in terms of the overall aggregate report that I provided today, you look at the big picture number. I am inclusive of Conard, Hall, REACH, and Strive, so it's inclusive of all students. When you go on and you look at the results, say on the on the state website. I believe Reach and Strive, both as separate programs, are listed separately, so we can disaggregate the results by those programs. They're small programs, so I've only got 40 students, say, enrolled in Reach, 10 of whom might be juniors. So a lot of the times, if you're looking that data might actually be suppressed on the public site, but we can view it on the secure side. To be able to look at the overall performance. When I'm looking at the performance of 10 students, I'm generally looking at it on an individualized basis because the variability is just going to be so dramatic. Strive, all by itself, is a special education program, so realistically 100% of that population is high needs. They're not necessarily at Strive because it's more of a behavior-intensive program, not an academic need program. So you would, we do have students that are participating in the SAT and do expect them to do well. But the performance is, we don't have the same average as we do the average score at Conard and average score at Hall.
Thank you.
Andrew?
I noticed that in the looking ahead section, it stated that the in-person in-school SAT was going to be online, and I'm wondering if that is reflective of a decision that the town made or something that College Board is making for the town.
Actually, that's a decision the state of Connecticut made.
Okay.
And we were on calls today to talk about all the factors that will go into that administration this year, including devices and bandwidth and proctors. So this class will be taking online. On the class of 2023 will be online.
Claire?
And I'm assuming there's a population that does not take the SAT that is not counted because of high academic needs as well.
Great. Thank you, Claire, very much. Thank you. Absolutely. There is what's referred to as the Connecticut Alternative Assessment. That's still the name?
Yes.
I gave up being district assessment coordinator a couple of years ago. And,
you're still on top of it.
And generally, sometimes referred to as the 1% population because the percent, the level of academic need that's necessary is is nationally only prevalent in 1% of the special education population. So it's a very intensive academic need. And those students have an alternative assessment that they can take that's typically well aligned with their IEP goals and objectives. And all other students, to include students just outside of that spectrum, there's an expectation from the state of Connecticut that would sit for the SAT. And we do have, we have a lot of students within our special education program that do have significant need that on their own might not be considering taking the SAT that have the opportunity and do so as part of the state testing program.
Other questions? All right. Thank you very much for the information. Nope, that's all right. Thank you. Moving on to routine matters and to our financial report. We will be receiving this information by Deb Holloon, and Liz Hewitt is here as well. Yes, to you both. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm wondering what's happening with all the number 2 pencils in Connecticut when the SATs move online. It's going to take down the whole industry.
Short Ticonderoga, yes.
They need a stronger lobbyist, I guess. Okay, so this is the financial report for the period ending October 31st, 2021. And obviously, it's still very early, both in our fiscal year, which starts on July 1st, but more importantly, still very early in our school year. So you're not going to see a lot of variances yet. It does hew pretty closely with our budget. I'll call your attention to the table on page 13. And that's where you will see a couple of variances. The teacher salary line item, we're underexpended or projected to be underexpended because we've hired in some teachers that were newer than those who left, and so their salaries were lower. You'll see a gap in the paraprofessional line item as well as teacher assistants, and that goes along with the trouble that we've had hiring paraprofessionals and teacher assistants. So this is yet one more advertisement for the fact that we need paraprofessionals and teacher assistants here in West Hartford. So we are projected to underexpend those line items. However, to make up for that fact and to meet the needs of the students in our district, we've been purchasing the services of paraprofessionals and TAs through contracted services, and that is listed under all other purchased services. So you'll see that $600,000 variance higher than what we would have projected to spend had we been able to hire those folks on our own. I do also want to note the people transportation line, 5345, is right on budget at this point in the year. That is a line that we sometimes see a larger variance in throughout the year, having to do with either field trips or more kids being outplaced. So we'll just keep an eye on that line item. But for now, it looks really good. Moving on to the state and federal grants fund report on page 14. I'll point out, as I always do, the gray line about 40% of the way down the page. All of the grants above that line are new this year. Any of the grants below that line are grants that we've had that we've been able to carry forward the funds into this year. We only have on this page grants where we have the award letter in hand. So this page will become fuller over the next couple of months as we receive additional grant award letters, including, importantly, the ESSER 3 grant. I believe our proposal was approved for that. We just haven't gotten the official award letter. But just to note a couple of the grants you may be very interested in. The ESSER 1 grant, 502062, most of the way down the page, does expire this year, and we are projected to spend all of that. The ESSER 2 grant, a couple up from that, is 2-year. We'll be spending half of that this year and half next year. And so those are two of the grants that are tied to COVID relief that came in from Congress specifically for schools. Other than that, nothing major to note on this page. Moving to special funds, again, nothing really unusual here. I'll just call your attention to a small increase in revenue from preschool, and that's because, as you may remember, we established some new preschool classrooms this year, and parents pay tuition for their children to go to our preschools, and the tuition is set by the state on a sliding fee scale based on the parent's income. So because we have additional slots, we have additional tuition coming in, and so we have a little bit of an increase in our earnings there. And then a little bit on instrument rental. I don't know if anybody else used the instrument rental program the way the Poland family did, but I highly recommend it, especially if your kid plays a large instrument like the baritone. You definitely don't want to have to schlep that back and forth. Moving to Nutrition Services Fund, this is looking so much better than it was last year. As a reminder, we have free meals for all students, that's breakfast and lunch, through the end of this school year. And that is, again, because of COVID relief passed by I believe this was passed by Congress. Yeah, passed by Congress. So there are free meals available. And if you look at our daily average student meals, you'll see in October, the average student meal count was 4,604 across the district. That is really, really high. And I'll just compare it. I mean, comparing it to October of 2020, I think is mostly meaningless because we only had some of the kids in school. But I looked up our meal count for October of 2019, and it was 3,408. And so you'll see that's a very large increase from 2019 to 2021. And most of the increase, I understand, is at the high school level. So it's good that our high school students are taking lunch. Thank you for doing that. One of the items that's a little lower than we would probably want it to be is salaries and benefits, and that's because we have 8 positions vacant out of the 60 positions in that department. So one more advertisement. We have 8 vacant positions in nutrition services, and we'd love to get more people to come help with our cafeterias. Food costs have gone up a little bit, no big surprise there, but you'll see our fund balance is in very good shape for nutrition services, partially because of the supplemental grant we got from the state, and partially because we're just selling a lot of meals this year and getting that money in from the feds. So that's the financial report. and Liz and I are both available for questions.
Thank you, Deb. Questions? All right, hearing none, may we receive a motion to approve the financial report for the period ending October 31st, 2021?
I'll make the motion. I'll make the motion to accept it.
All right, is there a second?
Second, Jason.
Any questions, discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
Continuing on to approval of the minutes. And before doing that, just want to be mindful of the minutes that we are looking to approve cover our meeting from last time. And I know the full duration of the meeting, some of our teammates were not here for the full duration of the meeting. So when it comes to voting, you may want to consider the abstention from that. But in regard to the minutes, looking for an approval of the minutes from the November 16th, 2021 regular Board of Education meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstention.
2 abstentions? All right. 3 abstentions, the motion passes. Thank you very much, and we will Thank you very much, and we will continue on to information and reports. Board members, communications and reports. Do we have any reports from our board members? All right, hearing none. And other information and discussions? Hearing none. We now have the honor of hearing from our students. I'm proud of you for being so attentive at this hour. So we will first start with Avery, please, for our report from our student board representatives.
Okay, good evening. Fall sports have come to a close. To summarize some high points, boys varsity football finished second in the league, and boys varsity soccer finished first. Some Indian students in Hall's Community Service Club recently organized the Siwa Diwala food drive for the West Hartford Food Pantry. This week is Spirit Week at Hall with new themes like Anything But a Backpack and classics like Decade Day. In the same vein, this Friday is PJ Day to benefit the children fighting cancer at CCMC. On Friday, Hall Choral Project, the Hall Esports Club, and Hall Robotics are partnering to host our next Super Smash Bros. Ultimate Tournament, which also benefits CCMC's Extra Life Project. Hall's Jewish Student Union is hosting a Hanukkah party this November. Homecoming is this Saturday, December 11th. And similar to what we were talking about earlier today, fall PSAT scores are being released by the College Board. Members of the public, students and families can view scores on the College Board's website. And next week, Hall's Black Box Theater production of Almost Maine opens Thursday, December 16th.
Thank you, Avery. Andrew.
Lake Hall, we're also in between, or I guess the winter sports season is starting right now. Tryouts are wrapping up this week. We have had a number of different opportunities in school during the day, such as the Chinese classes had Kung Fu master come in and teach Kung Fu, and I got to do that because I take Chinese. It was very interesting, but also there was a hackathon, our first hackathon, where students got together in groups after school and made apps, or at least designed the ideas for apps that could be purposed for social good in the school. Like Hall, we're also having a PJ Day. Ours is Friday, December 17th, and that's also to show solidarity with children and students of our age who have cancer. And we are also having a Pink Out this Friday in a similar vein. We also had our first issue of the newspaper come out, and I know the yearbook staff is working hard on the yearbook. Seniors are currently voting for superlatives, and then looking forward, we also have our homecoming dance. Ours is Friday, December 10th, one day before Hall's.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm so glad I listened to all that you said because I first thought you said hackathon. I was thinking, oh my, we don't know what, but app-a-thon.
No, hackathon.
Hack.
Like hack.
Some Hall students, it's hackathon. I think isn't it a national thing too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it an acronym?
No.
No, it's
It's like a marathon, but for hackers.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how it started, and then it's very cool.
Okay. Oh, well, that's good. It's not all bad. All right.
Turn off the computer.
Yeah, they're not like crashing our system, right? I mean, that's
Okay,
not
okay.
what it's.
Somebody crashed the system.
Yes.
Somebody crashed AWS today. The whole world came to a standstill.
All right. Well, I learned something new. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you both so much. All right. Continuing on to future business, announcements of future meeting dates. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, December the 21st, 2021, right here at 7 o'clock in the Legislative Chambers, room 314. And then next year, we have our meeting Tuesday, January the 18th, 2022, regular Board of Education meeting, right here in our Legislative Chamber room 314. Do we have a request for a future agenda item? And I actually would like to make a request. Earlier, again, we did have the attempt to have the proclamation to be shared, but we certainly recognize all of the multiple tasks and agenda items that our mayor and legislative, our delegation has. So would like to propose for that to be on the agenda for our next meeting on the 21st. And so I will present that as a motion that during our December 21st meeting, we add to the agenda a time for our mayor and delegation to present a proclamation to our superintendent. May I have a second?
Second.
Any question or discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any who oppose? Nay, and abstentions? So moved. All right, thank you. Any other agenda items? Comments from visitors. Do we have any visitors here that would like to make a comment? All right, hearing none, we do not have an executive session. And looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
The motion passes. We adjourn. Have a good evening.